I'm calling the meeting to order at 6:31 p.m. Thank you for joining us. As we get started tonight, we'll start with opening remarks, announcements, and agenda review. Is there anything in the agenda that needs to be added, mentioned, addressed, or changed in other ways? I'll just mention, I think what we'll probably start with is number 6, our Human Rights Proclamation, and then go into our regional bike share program and try to get those two out of the way before our public hearings. Doesn't look like anyone's here for public comment that I'm aware of. So, barring anyone knowing any different than that, why don't we get underway and start with our resolution and proclamations. So we have one in our packet. It is, yeah, it would probably be fairly deep in the packet because it's numbered 6. It's right before the list of license renewals.
Oh, I got it.
So-
I missed it the first time, so thank you.
I don't believe we'll read this evening because it's fairly lengthy unless someone really feels the need to. Yes.
No, I don't feel the need to, but I'm sorry. The last time I had looked at this, I realized weeks have gone by since then. But were we planning to have any members of the Human Rights Commission with us tonight? Because I'm not sure, did they know that we would do it right at 6:30?
I think they did,
Yeah.
if you want.
Okay.
Yes, the
Just wanna
chairman
make
was
sure
aware
they-
of it.
they
He's
got a
unable to be
chance.
here tonight. He sends
Just
his
wanna make
regrets
sure.
at the last minute.
I know they'd expressed interest, so. Cool, thank you.
So, barring any changes to to the proclamation, which I presume we have the dates correct. Director here. Yes. And so, Ms. Radway, if you want to give us a little introduction to this, thank you. Thank you.
Good evening, thank you. It is my privilege every year, on behalf of the Amherst Human Rights Commission, to request that the Select Board issue a proclamation for Human Rights Day. This will be the 69th annual Human Rights Day, as commemorated since 1948 by the United Nations. And in this past year, I thought it was worth noting that there have been 4 actions taken by the town on behalf of human rights of people everywhere that it was worth noting, including on December 5th, 2016, the Select Board proclaiming that to the extent permissible by law, the town shall not participate in federal law enforcement programs related to immigration enforcement. Following that, on December 30th, the town manager, school superintendent, and select board further issued a joint statement reaffirming that Amherst is a safe and welcoming community. And on May 8th, town meeting declared itself a safe community through adoption of a sanctuary community bylaw at annual town meeting by an overwhelming 165-4 majority. And also at annual town meeting, the town voted 153-4 in favor of authorizing the Select Board to file special legislation to authorize local voting rights for legal permanent residents residing in Amherst. All of these actions reinforce the fundamental proposition that every single one of us, everywhere and at all times, is entitled to the full range of human rights, and that it's all of our responsibility to uphold them. And I would like to invite everybody on Sunday, December 10th at 4 o'clock to join the Human Rights Commission and community members in a joint community reading of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, all 30 articles of it. It takes about a half an hour. It's a beautiful and moving event to actually hear the words spoken aloud. We have candles and flashlights and copies of the Declaration available, and we encourage everybody to attend. And in addition, the Amnesty International local chapter at 1:30 at the Jones Library at the same day is hosting a human rights event with Congressman Jim McGovern. So those two events are both on Sunday, December 10th. And with that, I would ask that you approve the proclamation.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Ms. Kruger.
Yes. Well, we have a motion, and thank you, Ms. Radway, for sort of summarizing this much longer proclamation. I was glancing at this, thinking, what could we pull out to summarize, and you did a great job. But before I read the motion, I just thought maybe in the second page of this, if I could read that and then go into the motion. Be it resolved that the Select Board of the Town of Amherst does hereby proclaim Sunday, December 10th, 2017 as Human Rights Day in Amherst, and the Select Board encourages all Amherst citizens to be mindful of human rights principles and urges all municipal, state, federal, and international bodies to incorporate these principles into their practices, laws, and policies. And with that, I'd like to move to proclaim Sunday, December 10th, 2017 as Human Rights Day in Amherst, and to further encourage, well, it's just what I just said, encourage all citizens to be mindful of human rights principles and urge municipal, state, federal, and international bodies to incorporate these principles.
Second. Here's a second. Is there further discussion? Hearing none.
I guess the only thing that I would say is that I was last year at the reading, and I think Mr. Bachman was there also, and it wasn't exactly the warmest day temperature-wise, but it was a very warm day in its feelings because of what we were doing, and it is a magnificent event, and I encourage everybody who's watching this select board meeting to consider attending, because it really is an uplifting and meaningful event.
Thank you. Other comments? Hearing none, all those in favor, please say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? And that's unanimous.
Thank
Thank you
you.
very much, Ms. Redway. And so, next on our agenda is the Regional Bike Share Program. So a couple of pieces there. There's the Memorandum of Understanding and also revised locations. So you have a handout, I see. Take one. Sorry.
Good evening. Thank you, Stephanie Ciccarello, Sustainability Coordinator for the town. I wanted to bring to you an update of the bike share program. I'll specifically be looking for your approval of the station locations, the revised station locations, but I wanted to also be able to give you an update on the program since the last time I've appeared before you. The steering committee consists of the towns of South Hadley and Amherst, and the cities of Springfield, Northampton, and Holyoke, as well as representative from the University of Massachusetts. The steering committee voted on the vendor. We had 4 applications that responded to the RFP, 4 vendors who responded to the application, and we went with a company called Bowegan out of Canada. Bowegan has installed at least 32 bike share station systems, both in the United States and Canada and overseas as well. So this regional system will be their 33rd. So they have a vast amount of experience. The system is going to be owned in part by the communities and then as well privately by Bowegan itself, because part of the reason we chose Bowegan is they made us an offer that was very difficult to say no to, in that they offered to give us an additional 210 bicycles and an additional 21 bike stations at no cost. And so that would bring the system up to 500 bikes in total regionally, so include for all of the communities, and the number of stations up to 50 regionally as well. And the bikes are now going to be 100% electric assist bikes, which means that The rider will actually have some power behind their riding beyond their own manual power. So they'll have, the bikes have a battery pack on them, so they'll be able to actually have assistance, especially for this area, riding up hills. This will make it much easier for a larger demographic of users to participate in the program. So we're very excited about that feature and felt that that will really help in making it a successful program. And we're also going to be looking to their the company, their partner, or Core Logistics, who does the operating of the system for Bowigan. And they, the company is founded by a military sergeant, Jim Duffney, from the U.S. military, and he has now created a program where he employs homeless and unemployed veterans, trains them in the operation and maintenance of the bikes for the bike share systems. So we'll actually be able to actually have some job creation within the region as well for homeless and unemployed veterans, which we're really excited about as well, because that was not something that we anticipated when we put out the RFP. So I already told you how many stations we'll have. What I did want to show you is this is an idea of what the stations will look like. We don't propose solar panels for the stations at this time. The station on the bottom that has the solar panel is a wayfinding station. The one above it is a kiosk. There will only be one station that will be the kiosk. That will be the main station. That is where users can walk up and actually become members by going to the kiosk. Otherwise, members can go up using they'll have either a card or a key fob or some way that they can release the bike. The mechanism is on the bicycle itself. The kiosk is only to assist people who want to become members, so you can have walk-up membership. In some cases, there may not be, the wayfinding station, I learned today, is actually sort of reliant upon sponsorship. So if we get a sponsor, the wayfinding station would actually have, one side would be a map and the other side would be some kind of a statement in support of bike share by the sponsor. So it won't say something, it won't be necessarily advertising that's on this wayfinding station, but for example, that they threw out today, it could be something like, make sure you wear your helmet from Bay State Health, if Bay State Health were to be a sponsor. So that's the kind of advertisement or statement, community statement that would be on the wayfinding station. So the stations, as I said, will be in 10 locations in town. 5 of them are on the University of Massachusetts campus, but 5 of them are in the community itself. And the 5 that we now propose are going to be, I'll start from the north moving south, on North Pleasant Street, East Pleasant Street, Main Street, University Drive, and East Hadley Road. And I'll show you each station location individually. So this is the North Pleasant Street location. The driveway that you see there on the slide to my left, your right, the driveway is to the North Village Apartments. So this location, there's actually just south of that location is a bus shelter. Every single one of the stations is located adjacent or very near to a bus shelter, because again, the idea behind these bikes is that they serve as additional transportation. They can serve as the last mile of transportation in a commuter's trip. So they are not necessarily for recreational riding. They're really just another mode of transportation. The way you would take a bus or a cab, you would want to think of these as equivalent to Zipcar, except the bicycle version of Zipcar. The next station location we proposed is at Kendrick Park. This location was chosen after discussions with various committees. I went before the TAC, the Transportation Advisory Committee, I went before the DAAC, and I went before the DRB. And this location took the place of the one that was proposed on over by Amherst College. We decided that in the end that location was problematic primarily for safety reasons. We were going to have to put a bump out on Boltwood Avenue if we were going to put the station there. And so they were concerned about turning radiuses and how that might be a safety problem. So after much discussion and examination of alternative locations, Kendrick Park came up as the one that most people seemed most favorable for. We do want to have at least 2 stations that are right in the downtown area. We don't want them right next to each other, but there is these serve different bus routes, so it makes sense to actually have at least 2 in the downtown location. This is the Main Street location, and this is the one outside of Town Hall, excuse me, that will serve as the primary location, and this is where we would locate the kiosk. This location's been reviewed before by the Select Board and by other committees, and this one we believe we still have maintained as the primary location. It certainly has the most visibility. It's kind of the densest area in terms of traffic, so it's actually a location that is most favorable for a bike share program. And another location that is fairly new that you haven't seen before is University Drive. This is outside of 170 University Drive, the medical center, and across from the entrance into the CVS parking lot and the shopping center. So this location is more of a destination location. Because it's located near a medical facility, shopping, grocery shopping, sort of covers a lot of needs. So it would be a very high traffic area. The other benefit is that it's also directly on the bike trail. So we feel like this was also a primary location for a bike share program. And then the last location is located on East Hadley Road. This is the driveway entrance that you'll see on the slide to the left to the boulders. When I went out to look at these stations, I had a conversation with Guilford Mooring, DPW superintendent, and we discussed the location of the stations. He requested that we move the station back to the property boundary. All of these locations are in the public right-of-way, obviously, which is why I'm here. But we moved it back, and when we were concerned about the fact that it was blocking the sidewalk, he suggested that we extend the sidewalk around the station, and I believe over this next year they're going to be creating a multi-use path along the entire corridor of East Hadley Road. So that would also go around the station. And there is enough room to actually have the 8-foot bike path go around the station and still have some room before you're on the actual road. You could have some kind of a grass strip before you're on the road. So those are all of the locations. What I was looking for this evening was to have approval for the Select Board for the locations. I did give a packet of slides to Mr. Steinberg, who I believe is going to pass them out to you all, and that's the packet that we would be looking for you to vote on this evening. The stations, I anticipate that there may be some change because now all the stations require electricity. There may be some shifting of where the locations are because of the need to access electricity. We don't want to be too far. We want to try to get the sites, the stations located as close as we can to a power source. So there may be some shifting. This Thursday, the DPW superintendent, myself, and Christina Shen, who is the electrical inspector for the town, and I will be going out with representatives from Bewegan, and we're going to go to each of the station locations and examine what it is they need for the installation. And based on that site visit, there may be some changes, which we would obviously, let you know. We don't anticipate there'll be huge changes, but if there are, certainly we'll bring them back to you post that site visit.
Great. So the first thing I'll ask about is that, excuse me, also on our agenda is the memorandum of understanding. So it's been altered as well. Could you just touch on that and how it's different than it was the last time?
Sure. So this is a revised MOU based on our partnership now with the vendor. The first MOU identified the steps that we were taking to essentially get to a vendor, and now that we have a partnership, and basically that that relationship changed how we were originally proposing the program. So originally, when we proposed the program, it was going to be completely publicly owned and privately operated. But now, because Bowegan is basically donating an additional 21 stations and 210 bicycles, they're going to have some ownership of that component of the system. So that's, that was a shift in how we were sort of structuring the program. So the MOU is now revised to reflect that change, as well as the fact that we've moved along in the process and we're in a different place and we're now focused on operations and growth of the system.
So the other question I had about that was, I was under the impression or the understanding, and I may have been maybe mistaken, that there was also another community or two that wanted to join in with us. Is that not come to fruition, or is that going to be a separate addendum to this, or was that not?
That may be, so we're having a meeting next Wednesday to finalize the draft MOU. So basically, we've had town council review the current draft that you see, and we're getting additional comments. Again, we anticipate that they're not going to be huge changes, but we don't think that at this point we're going to include adding the other towns at this revision. We may add them later, but not at this stage.
Questions? Mr. Sandberg?
Just a couple of comments. One is that I think that since the last time that the Select Board discussed this, South Hadley joined.
Correct.
They were not an original, so there actually has been change. So I wanted to clarify that. I did meet with Ms. Ciccarello several weeks ago regarding this draft, and at that time I did look at the prior version that we had approved at the board in the last time to see, and it was, as indicated, I could find no real inconsistencies. It was moving forward because instead of a lead community to be identified, it identifies the lead community that has now been chosen, which is Northampton, and they are doing a great job with moving this along. And it referred to vendor selection, and now a vendor has been chosen. I think that the big questions always are what financial implications are there and financial commitments for us, for the town. And in some ways, there was more uncertainty about that at the time that we approved the prior version than there is now, as Ms. Ciccarello indicated, because of Bowegan coming on board. And also, before that, we were anticipating and hoping for a CMAQ grant, and we didn't have it. And there was, so we all kind of recognized that the capital cost of acquiring all of the bicycles and station equipment and other infrastructure was a major expense. Since we now have the grant and we now have a vendor that is actually putting further financing, it kind of takes what was the major uncertainty of financial commitment off the table. The one thing that is a commitment to us is that if during the first 3 years we don't follow through in any, or ask for or remove stations and don't replace them, and there's a clawback on the federal grant, then we're accepting responsibility for the clawback. I don't see that as being a significant issue. I don't think that it is a likely outcome, but it is worth pointing out. The other, I assume is in there, but this now gets to a clarification question from Ms. Ciccarello or Mr. Bockelman, and that is that the way I was assuming it in reading is that the financial cost of doing any work to make sites appropriate for one of the stations is our additional responsibility. So, for example, the sidewalk that's shown on East Hadley Road that needs to be relayed is our expense. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
But otherwise, I think that we kind of at least have certainty of what it is, and at least my assessment would seem to be that that may be the major one, though I wasn't sure at Kendrick Park if there was any grading problems or work that needed to be done for the station there.
So that will, at the very least, need a concrete pad. And there was some additional funding that the steering committee secured for concrete pads in communities. We don't have them for every station location. But in addition to that, the town did appropriate some some funding for the bike share station program for operations. And there is some funding to cover at least the cost of things like the sidewalk extension in FY18. There's $26,000 that was appropriated for the bike share program.
So my assessment is that great work has been done. We have, I have great appreciation for Ms. Ciccarello and what she's accomplished, and thanks to WFCR and New England Public Radio, she's become a regional public face for the bike share program, which is great.
Scuba.
It's somewhat in line with what Mr. Steinberg said in terms of the site work and preparation. It sounded like the one on East Hadley Road, that sidewalk relocation or sidewalk extension might be included in another project that we're doing. So rather than that as a direct expense to the bike share program, that there was a multipath. And so often when we're doing construction anyway, it's absorbed in the project in the other project's cost, and I didn't know if that had been figured out or.
I think the timing might be the issue, because Bewegan, and again, these are conversations we're
Right.
going to have on Thursday. I'm hoping that it can be coordinated so that they happen at the same time. I'm just not sure that the timing is going to work. So at the very least, there would be some temporary sidewalk extension
Right,
around.
where you put the pad in and the sidewalk's coming
Right,
to
exactly.
follow at some point.
So some kind of prep
Yeah,
work.
and my only, I mean, this is great, and not to underestimate how hard it is to find the 5 locations, because I know it's been kind of a Rubik's Cube for you. And I think these all make sense for the reasons you explained. And in the same way that you said, well, because of the electrical needs, something, there may be shifts and changes, and I'm assuming also a caveat is whenever there's this much construction and site work going on, when you're actually in the field or actually doing the project, things shift and change and need to be modified. So I would just say that, we're very interested in this project and would want to kind of keep up with those changes. I mean, I don't mean like 1 inch over, but, right, because, where you literally have to come back for, like a permit change. And I'm just, if there's some modification that you think is, rises to the level, or if Mr. Bockelman does, then we just would like to keep current. So like, is that what we thought we saw on, December 4th? But other than that, I think it's great.
Absolutely.
So I think the motion as proposed has a statement in there that if there is a location change, it's incumbent upon me to let the board know, so that any location change, I think we'd be coming back anyway to
Yeah.
report on the progress of this project.
Yeah, I mean, just like, it's still the location, but it kind of moved over 3
If it
feet.
crosses the street or something
Yeah,
like that, yeah,
right,
you'd want to
right.
know
Not an
anything
inch,
like
but
that, yeah.
And we'll be working very closely with the DPW.
So I have a couple of questions. First, talking about the bikes, because I think the last time we spoke about the bicycles themselves, they weren't electric assist, now they are. So that's, an interesting and potentially beneficial aspect of them. One sort of question I have is just, what's the top speed?
They're going to be maxed out at 12 miles per hour.
Okay, so if you're just doing electric assist and you crank it up, it's 12 miles an hour. All right, that's good to know. The other thing that I saw on this one that you're showing right now on East Hadley Road, it looks as though the signage for the boulders is right there. So I presume there'll be some coordination with the boulders about that, so we don't block their signage and not in any significant way. But maybe more importantly is the one that shows Kendrick Park. We have the stone that sits sort of on the ground, and it's literally would be right behind it. So obviously either the stone's got to be moved or which is probably more likely than the
Right.
bike location. But I presume you noticed that as well, and so I just was noting that.
Absolutely. It was, right. And the station, again, the station may shift depending on which utility pole is closest to access. So it may or may not end up right in front of the stone. But either one or the other is going to shift.
You saw that stone. It wasn't Photoshopped.
It wasn't photoshopped in or out. The other question I have is, in a few years, there'll be a certain amount of wear and tear on the bicycles and a need for replacement. And so obviously, if there are grants available, we'll want to take advantage of those. But are we anticipating putting a set amount of money aside in either capital planning or operating budgets for the purpose of doing replacement of bicycles and that sort of thing? I mean, maybe it's more a question for the manager than for you, but.
We have not done that. This contract is through 2023, I believe. So I don't know the answer. We have not set aside any money for this.
Okay.
And I can say that the steering committee anticipates that this won't cost the communities anything. The idea is to actually make this something that this communities can support, but we're hoping that the onus will really be on Bowegan to continue and to grow the system.
This is just for my own curiosity, and I probably could have found it out before now, but I'm just wondering, like, if I am a member and I get the bike and I go from downtown to the stop on North Pleasant Street, and I go to put the bike in the charging station, but there's no space, what happens?
So these, the bikes have the ability to be locked anywhere adjacent to where the station is. So you can, without penalty,
Leave it there.
leave it somewhere
Yeah.
adjacent
Okay.
to
I
the
was
station
just
or next to it.
started wondering what
And
happens.
it can be locked
Yeah.
and,
Figured they'd thought of that already.
right, there would be no additional cost. The only time you might incur an additional cost for leaving it elsewhere is if it's not near a
Yeah,
station
just
and you sort of
any
just
old
randomly
place.
leave it somewhere, you would incur a fee
Okay, gotcha.
for the retrieval.
Thanks.
Further comment?
It's come a long way. Looks good.
Want the first motion?
Please.
To move us along, I move to authorize the town manager to sign on behalf of the town of Amherst a memorandum of understanding for Valley Bike Share, November 2017, a partnership by and among the cities of Springfield, Holyoke, and Northampton, and the towns of Amherst, South Hadley, the Pioneer Valley Planning Commission, and the University of Massachusetts Amherst, pursuant to the provisions of Massachusetts General Laws, Chapter 40, Section 4A, for purposes of establishing, managing, and operating Valley Bike Share for the Pioneer Valley.
Is there a second?
Second.
Is there further discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. And that's unanimous with one absent.
And then I move to authorize use of the public way as shown in the Valley Bike Share Amherst update dated December 4, 2017 on North Pleasant, East Pleasant, and Main Streets, University Drive, and East Hadley Road, and to grant the town manager authority to grant changes in location as necessary and to report said changes to the select board.
Is there a second?
Second.
Is there further discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
And that's 4-0 with one member absent. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. Look forward to it.
Thank you, Stephanie.
Still spring of 18, we're looking to,
Spring of 18,
okay,
probably end of May,
end of May?
roughly.
Okay, great. Thank you. So we're still just a smidge before us. We have a public hearing tonight at 7:10 PM. So, do we think we can take up the Pioneer Valley Chinese Immersion Charter School comments due topic? And to that point, I should probably yield the chair if we, because it does relate to the schools. So do we think we can take that up? Or should we take on our consent calendar. That may be a more appropriate thing to do at the moment.
I'll have some questions about the consent calendar, so it won't be,
As quick as we might think.
it won't be long, but. Go ahead, let's do this, because I don't think that,
Well, we can pull something out if you wish to do that, and then we can talk about something that might be more involved that way.
because I was just going to, just so you know, in the letter that we were, that you were referencing about the Chinese Immersion Charter School, suggest a few minor changes to a little bit of the language in the draft, and but I think that we could certainly approve it and then let the vice chair, since I think the vice chair has to take this over because of your problem, or you, if you prefer, to make the adaptations.
All right. So why don't I yield the chair to
Sure.
Ms. Kruger to take over the Pioneer Valley Charter Immersion School.
Okay, so while we're waiting for the next timed item, we're going to take up the letter that's regarding the amendment request to the Pioneer Valley Chinese Immersion Charter School in Hadley. And as you said, you had some sort of edits. Mr. Steinberg, did you want to start to go through that?
They aren't substantial. I think that they were more in just clearing up wording, and I can just give you, it's mostly the third paragraph. Instead of say, because there's confusion in use of the word "the board," this is actually a letter to a board, but from a board. So that I would have suggested something like, you wisely chose to reject the request by PVCICS to expand enrollment in 2016 and 2017 for fundamentally sound reasons, which you articulated clearly. I mean, that was the sentence, and I can give it to you. But it was not a major change. It was just a clarification point.
Mr. Steinberg, I see why you want to clarify. I wonder if it makes sense to say "your board" instead of "you."
I think that I would like to frame it that you can have discretion later in the wording, because we're basically approving a letter. It's sort of tricky because it is a letter addressed to a board, and to say "your board," somebody write that to us? Or, think about it. I don't think that we need to decide that. We don't need to vote
Certainly
on
don't need to
that.
get hung up on it. Ms. Brewer?
I prefer you.
Okay. Looks like,
You just take out "the board" and put "you" in two places.
okay. Okay, and I think our town manager's got those changes, and is that the extent?
That was it.
Any other discussion on the letter in front of us for review? It's similar to the one attached that was the February letter that we wrote on this topic. It's in your packet and in Ms. Brewer.
I just wanted to acknowledge the extensive effort the Amherst School Committee and others put together, the letter that they gave to guide us, because we had asked and said, we want to make sure we see your letter so that we don't step on anything in our letter. And I thought that their graphs were very helpful this year, and that that was a good letter to base ours off of, even though ours was largely just an update from last year, because they did all that work.
Right,
So,
right. It was a good team effort. Mr. Steinberg?
So I was going to offer a motion, but I have a question before I offer the motion. That is that the way that it's written on the motion sheet is authorizing the chair to sign the letter, and I wondered if the chair would prefer that it be a motion to authorize the vice chair to sign a letter.
Yes, please.
Then I move to authorize the vice chair to sign a letter to the Massachusetts Board of Elementary and Secondary Education on behalf of the Select Board regarding the proposed expansion of the Pioneer Valley Chinese Immersion Charter School, PVCICS.
Second, but I have a question.
Okay, yes, so motion is made and seconded, go ahead.
So we're still going to have Mr. Slaughter's name listed, though, like we did last time? It's just that it's going to be signed by you, just like it was signed by you last time? Okay. Cool.
So, just a question on logistics, since it has to be edited and reformatted, is there any sense of when this should go out, or just come in and sign it,
Well, next time you come in for the agenda setting, whenever. I'm not
whenever
sure.
that is? I'm sure
Tomorrow or the
I'm
next-
sure I'll
yeah,
be here
tomorrow.
soon.
We'll have it ready for you tomorrow.
It's not, I don't think it's,
It has to be there by the 15th, right?
Want 4 for Monday.
You might have gotten an invitation late this afternoon on that.
okay, because usually I have jury duty on Tuesday, but it did get canceled, so it was strange that I agreed to something on
Because the December 11th meeting is
a,
new.
okay, so I just got that.
Yeah, oh, you may not
I
have
haven't,
gotten it yet.
I'm behind, but,
Yeah.
okay, and it'll
I-
work.
Deborah had reached out to
Just
Doug.
like- Usually Tuesdays, no, but I'm around. Okay, that's when I'll do it. Okay, with that, I can step down from,
I got to call for the vote.
oh, thank you, inexperienced vice chair here. Okay, we have a motion, it's been seconded, all questions and discussion is over. Do you have anything else? And if not, we'll come to a vote. All those in favor of the motion for the letter to Pioneer Valley Chinese Immersion Charter School, or about the Chinese. Say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Okay, that's 3 and 1,
Abstained.
One abstain, one absent. Okay.
3-1-1.
All right. So yield the chair back.
I am yielding.
All right.
So yielded.
So
Are we
it's
at-
just after 7:10, I believe our 7:10 public hearing on the
To get them,
liquor license. I think they're just coming in now. So do we have to do a motion to open the hearing? Or just declare it?
I think you just declare it. Usually that's what I,
All right.
just take the time that you've opened.
So for the,
Give it to,
Would you just hand them to Mr.
him.
Steinberg? He'll pass them out to us. Yeah, give him everything.
yeah, he passes them out.
He does.
So what this is the
The-
final schematic from
let him open the public hearing, okay?
okay, no, that's all right. So,
Are any of you guys a notary by any chance? I have to submit an affidavit that I gave notice to all the abutters, and I can't notarize my own signature. Can I ask you?
I don't
to-
have any of my equipment with me.
Okay, but, all right,
I can observe you.
okay. Now we can go.
So, okay, let's pass that around. I'm going to open the public hearing regarding changes to the liquor license related to the Spoke at 7:14 PM. And so, with that, if the folks from the Spoke would like to sort of introduce the circumstances that bring you here tonight.
Hi, I'm Christy Bodine. I'm the attorney for Chad O'Rourke, who's the owner of The Spoke LLC, doing business as The Spoke at 35 East Pleasant Street in Amherst. The sub and pizza restaurant surrendered their lease, and Chad took over this, or is taking over the space that they were in, and would like permission from the town and the ABCC to expand his premises to incorporate that space so that the sub will basically increase in size and capacity. In addition to that, there will be food service, in-house food service added to the premises. We're going to be going to the ZBA for a special permit to change the use accordingly. So that's what this application is for. And I have, because it's an expansion of premises, I was required to send certified mail notices to the abutters per the abutter list. I have the return receipt cards here to turn in, but I need to get my affidavit of notice notarized because I can't notarize my own signature, so we'll add that at the end, I guess. This isn't a really complicated transaction. Do you have any questions? Have you looked at the packet?
What I just passed around to you guys is the schematic that was Laura Fitch, who is our architect, drew up, and it's what we've discussed with inspection services and the, handicap requirement bathrooms and meeting everything that we need to do the expansion from their end. So that schematic that you guys just got is the proposed layout that would be.
Does it differ from the one that's labeled the same in, we have a packet of things?
There's more detail in the one that he
Yeah.
just submitted. The occupancy is really more nailed down. The seating details are more nailed down.
The bathrooms are
There's
the
changes to the
biggest ones.
bathrooms. He's now got a 3-stall women's restroom and a larger men's bathroom. There's a handicapped accessible bathroom. This is all to meet the code requirements for the building permits and for the use in the space. So,
Yeah, I would say the one that you have is probably void at this point, because it's, the bathrooms were what the big requirement was in figuring that out.
and the space is also going to be sprinklered.
Oh, yeah,
Yeah.
that was the other part, is getting that sprinkler closet in to be able to sprinkler the building, which is on that schematic now, it wasn't on the old one.
Thank you. Does the board have questions for the applicant? Mr. Steinberg?
Well, I did, just to try and understand, because I had looked at the prior one, I'm trying to take a quick look right now to see if there's some answers. As I understand it, this drawing reflects the entire new spaces, which is the current premises, and the additional premises.
That's
So
correct.
it's
If you had the drawing sort of horizontally facing you, so the sort of the left side of the drawing is where the existing spoke is, and the kind of right side of the drawing is where the sub used to be. So it's opening up into that space. So the existing kitchen, what used to be the sub's kitchen, is going to be the spoke's kitchen. And there's a wall between the two spaces that's going to eventually come down and open it up that way. So, and he's asking for also permission to add outdoor. He's got the outdoor patio area and the existing spoke, and he wants to add the license to include the outdoor patio area on the proposed, expansion, which will be subject to the same, requirements and so forth as the existing patio, as far as exits and crowd control and things like that.
So does the patio area encroach on the existing sidewalk in front of the?
It's already there,
It's already there.
yeah.
And no, it does not
No,
encroach on it. The existing sidewalk is outside, like if you're looking at the picture here, this would be the existing sidewalk out here. It doesn't encroach on that whatsoever. These are actually concrete planter beds that are there, that U shape that you see are actually in place already. And our walkway would be what's in front of that, between the glass of the front of the business. And then on the outside of that is the public walkway.
And then the main entrance door is beyond the access point to the outside patios.
well, if you were walking down the sidewalk, you'd sort of have to take a right between the two patios and to get into the main entrance door. That's, yeah.
And the other thing that I wasn't quite certain about as I looked at the drawing was where the access is for the public to the women's restroom facility.
So the restrooms are at the back of the building. So if you walked into let's pretend you're walking in the front door. If you turn left and go all the way down the bar, the men's room is on the left side of the space. And if you walked in the front door and turned to the right and walked again around all the way to the back, the women's room is accessible from the right side of the space. So there's actually a wall between
That's a
where the
hall-
men's and
this
women's,
is a
there's a
hallway.
hallway access to
So-
both of them.
In the
So it's a
back.
hallway that goes around what looks like the kitchen
kitchen,
yes.
area,
correct.
and then you go into the left.
Correct, yeah.
Right.
Okay, that clarifies. There's, I guess, two additional questions. One is, there's reference to the stairway at one point on the far left.
So that's inside of the closed-off storage area that's just used only by the business?
Yeah, that's just
It's
a
past the
little
walk-in
attic.
freezer, there's no customer access into that. And there's a little attic, the stairway goes up to there's a little attic space
Okay.
above for storage.
And that's actually on both sides. If you look on the existing side, which is the left side of the picture there, you see where it says walk-in, and then you have the stairs there. That's all private space, that's storage back there, so the stairs are the access to that side of the attic. And then over here, behind the other walk-in is another set of stairs, which accesses the little attic space that's up there. So again, not open to the public.
So the reason that I was asking that question, we'll get to later maybe, but I'll just put it now for the public hearing portion too. In prior liquor license hearings and actions that followed, when there's been storage area, that has been separately listed as additional square footage. And I didn't see that in the request of the motion, so I was wondering about that element of the application, just to make sure we have it correct.
Well, the description of premises requires a description of the premise, including number of floors, number of rooms on each floor, any outdoor areas, and total square footage. So, yeah, we just included the first floor. We didn't include the attic storage area in that. It's not part of the licensed premises. It's not accessible to the public, and it's not used for liquor service, so it wasn't included. We could add it if you really wanted it, but I think the concern on the application is the licensed premises being the space where,
And it wasn't part of the original application for the spoke as well.
yeah.
And
Of course, that probably predates your ownership.
No, that
No,
was
because
6 months ago.
he
Yeah,
just
I know.
transferred the
Or not,
license.
11
Yeah,
months
you're
ago,
the
I'm
most
sorry.
recent, but,
Yeah.
no, it just seems like in some of the more recent ones we've done, I recall that element to it, and my colleagues can,
I recall that as well, that we included some of the storage space because it often involved the storage of the liquor, and that's why we encourage that inclusion. Obviously,
Is
it's
it
not
for
one of-
securing purposes of it? Is that why, for the safety of
that's
it?
part, you know, if you're storing alcohol in those locations, then we were of the opinion that we should include that in the space that's a part of the license, but evidently, we haven't always done that. If 6 months ago.
The attic is only accessible by those 2 stairwells. There's
Right.
no other access to it at any point
Right.
in the building, so.
Ms. Kruger, do you have something?
Just, I don't want to preempt my colleagues on the zoning board that are going to look at this, or the building inspector, but I'm looking at the pathway to the women's room, and I see a little line that says 3 feet from the chair that's all the way tucked into that little table, and the bar stool that's all the way up against the bar.
Yep.
And it looks really tight for somebody in a chair to get
It's
to.
actually not. It's much bigger. And so
Okay,
the,
and I know that these little drawings of furniture
They
are
are.
really like concept, they're not like
Yeah.
the scale and,
Precisely,
but I did see the 3-foot line there, and I'm like, that's assuming everyone's
that
like,
is actually inaccurate. Yeah,
Okay.
when there's a tremendous, if you took the actual length of that space there, it's from the outside glass to where that interior wall is, it's about 34 feet. It's very large. And so when you put 3 tables there, the tables, if you look at the tables that are drawn on here, and again, like you said, it's an architect popping their template on there.
yeah, I get
It
that.
almost looks like the tables are bigger than some of the fridges we have.
Mm-hmm.
That are, they're not. And so that's the reality, is that when you put 3 tables and 4 chairs there, the space for that corner is much greater than 3 feet.
Okay, so it's just,
No less than 3 feet, right?
But no less than.
And and bearing in mind, too, that
Yeah.
these drawings are being done by a licensed architect who's aware of all the accessibility.
I understand that, but that's
I
why
think
it's
our focus
peculiar
was all
that,
put into the back part
Yeah.
where, for the access to the bathroom, the initial opening to the hallway is 40
Yeah.
inches. As it gets to the back, it's
Yeah.
60 inches to make sure that we're 18 inches off the door
right.
and meet all
And
those.
I'm
code
sure if
requirements.
there's an issue, you'll rearrange your furniture.
Yeah,
or
that's-
whatever. I mean, there's options, but
Yeah.
I just saw that and I was like, how do you get around? And then I saw this little line that says 3 feet.
Yeah, no, that's-
Okay.
That's why I think it says 3-foot minimum,
Well,
so that she's making sure that, like you said, so it's no less than that when we do it.
Or any questions at this
I'm
point?
looking to see why, where that section is about storage, because I'm finding a document, although sometimes when you find a document, you don't know what it's linked to, and if it was actually a draft or if it was a real thing. But it is guidelines about, yep, it's guidelines on our page that say you should identify where the alcohol is stored. That's our guideline. And so it should be identified. We don't have a lot in writing in our guidelines, but we do have that.
We do have that.
And it says,
Where it'll be stored.
if only a portion of the square footage will be devoted to the sale of alcohol beverages, blah, 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 blah. The area should be clearly marked. All storage of alcohol and manners of egress should be identified. So obviously, the manners of egress are all identified, but alcohol storage is supposed to be identified,
You're storing
according to the
alcohol.
guidelines that are on the website.
Can I ask a question so that I can add that as we get to that feature? So if you're looking at the schematic and the left, all the way upper left corner where the walk-in and the access is, above our walk-in and to the right of that are the utility, like the furnace and stuff is all stored in that. So the only accessible space, and I'm asking this question so I can determine the accurate square footage of what we would have to disclose to you, is just above that stairwell. That stairwell's fully, as you go up the stairs, it's open to the ceiling, so there's no storage right above that. So that little part that's just above the walk-in and as you go to the left towards the stairs is where the liquor storage is stored. So we're talking about, maybe less than a 200 square foot area. But I could add that to that if that's what you guys are looking for. I'm assuming everything to the right of that, which is above the bathrooms, which is where all the furnaces is, the existing side has one furnace, the new side has 2 air handlers. So the majority of the upper area is taken up by those. So I guess the question would be would you want the entire square footage of the attic space, or would you want the square footage of just where the liquor is being stored?
I think it's just where the liquor would be stored would be the place that we'd need to add to that.
Identify it.
And that's in your existing premises and your
That's in the
existing, you're doing it
right.
now. So
Yeah,
it's not the
exactly.
new additional, but I think to.
The new existing is paper goods and stuff like,
Right,
other
but to
stuff.
clean this up and to make sure that you're capturing all the space that you'll be using for liquor storage
Yep.
or serving alcohol, I think that's what the board's goal
Sure.
is.
You said that, that the food service would be expanded. There's currently food being served at the Spoke, correct?
Yeah,
Is
so we
it
would
part
have
of
a
your-
full kitchen now.
Okay, so could you just describe, like, what do you do now for food, and what do you, kind of, just the general sense of what you'd be serving and how that would work?
Change to. So what we do now for food is, is kind of the crock pot type of stuff. We have a popcorn machine, we have a microwave, we have crock pots that are used, and, stuff that, the hot dog steamer machine, yeah. So for us, the desire is to actually get a kitchen to use with real refrigerators and walk-in coolers and stuff like that. So in the expansion, if you can see them labeled on here, there would be an oven with a prep table for pizza, so pizza slices, sandwich prep, cook and a fry later. We're still narrowing down whether we're gonna actually go with a open fryer later or kind of the turbo chef enclosed ones, but it would sort of be the traditional pub food of sandwiches and wings and pizza slices and stuff like that. So certainly a better menu, more vast menu than what we can offer currently, because we would have a full kitchen at that point. So that's part of that's one of the reasons we want to do this. More egresses, more square footage, more bathrooms, and a kitchen, a real kitchen.
I'm trying to find it. I thought I had it in my notes, and I do somewhere, but I can't get my hands on it. I mean, we've got actually proposed food items in the special permit application, but we haven't filed the special permit application yet, so. But we were pretty detailed about that.
Sure.
Could you run through one more time for us, because of the update of what is and what would be and then what will be, where we are in terms of, the sub didn't have alcohol, obviously the Spoke did, so where are we in terms of the actual occupancy? Because as I understood you to say, and as I'm seeing on this sheet, it's down from what you had originally proposed. It's a slightly smaller number.
Yeah, and how it became based on the bathroom concerns. So we started, when I met with Rob Moore and we were talking to Brian Latham, and we were first talking about it, the bathrooms controlled everything for the capacity. So basically what we said is, let's figure out the bathrooms first and work back from there. And that's how we determined it. And so it became, well, we can get 3 women's toilets in, and we can get, essentially 3 men's toilets in, and based on those numbers, we got to the 180 person capacity, which was perfect, because on the high end, we were at 200. On the low end, we could be down as far as 130 if we wanted to bring out the bar and add more tables and chairs to eat up square footage. And so we figured out how we were going to make the bathrooms work for ADA requirements, and then from there is how we determined the capacity, how many tables and chairs and seats and other things that we would have to equal that capacity, and that's how we came up to the 180. And that's kind of, I think, where we're at. That makes the most sense at this point.
Yeah.
And egress is obviously.
Mr. Steinberg, did you have another thing you were?
No, I didn't.
Okay.
I think one of the things that we can do is pull that page in the application that has the description of the space and modify it to include the capacity that we know it is now. The capacity and occupancy would need to be corrected on that page, and then add the storage description. That's page 2 of the actual application form,
Right.
the premises information.
Right, since you're already having
Yeah,
to replace.
so if we can swap out that page and give you some additional information then that'll make the whole thing accurate, because right now the numbers don't quite match the drawings that we just got, so we'll do that.
Yes.
Perhaps it's the obvious thing to state, but since we don't have a lot of written guidelines, maybe it's not obvious, which is that this has been there had been a successful transfer of the spoke to the current ownership and management, that we haven't heard. It's one of those no news is good news situations, so we have not heard anything negative from the police chief. So for those watching at home who are wondering, like, what about all your character questions and stuff? We have met with these folks before in public session last year, and then also the chief has also worked with them and has not brought any violations to our attention.
Correct. I met with the chief this morning. He's already met with the applicant, and it's been, under this ownership and management, there have been no violations whatsoever.
Just a question, Mr. Slatter. So if we're going to get some adjustment to the information, does that impact the language and the numbers in our motion?
Yes, our motion is messed up.
So, I mean, it would be nice to act on this tonight, but we might need a little repair work.
So the proposed seating capacity will be, let's see.
Because what we have, and I'm sorry if I could, Mr. Slaughter. So this is one of those funny situations, Ms. Bowden, which is that, you don't write our motion for us, we write it, and
Yeah.
sometimes we don't write it well, and sometimes things change after we write it. So we have a combination of issues here. What it currently says is 2,667 square feet, not including 530 square feet for the patio deck with 1 entrance, 3 exits, and proposed seating capacity of 60 and occupancy of 90. So none of those numbers add up.
The 2,600 and change is probably the accurate number, including the attic space, to be honest with you. But the capacity based on the rest of it is not.
Yeah, the seating capacity would be 97,
And the
and
occupancy
the occupancy would be 180.
That,
97,
It's-
180.
So those numbers are taken off of the application,
Those numbers would be
added.
the numbers
right,
that
but I
you
think- I think we're-
used were taken off the application form.
Yeah.
But since we gave you a new floor plan with new numbers on it, then I will need to give you
Surprise.
Yeah.
another page 2 of the application that says that the seating capacity is 97 and the occupancy is 180.
And I'll get the accurate square footage, but I think the 2,667 almost hits that nail on the head there, so we're pretty accurate.
I guess there's a couple of things we could do
Yeah.
here with regard to this. I mean, one is we could potentially leave the hearing open. We can't actually take the motion until we close the hearing,
Right.
but it's to some extent sort of the comfort level of the board, whether or not to approve this with some modifications or some other language that might include that, or we can hold off until next week if you have suggestions.
What I would say is it suggests is you see if there's public comment, close the public hearing, and then not act on it tonight, wait for us to come back for a legitimate, or for a revised motion for you to act on at your next meeting.
Okay.
might I ask, or have you asked the applicant, is that delay going to be problematic for you? Because otherwise, we could do some fancy footwork to try to fix this and put in approximates and
You guys did a
to be
wonderful job
submitted.
of getting me in very quickly, so we've got time, so that's totally fine.
It's entirely likely it would come up next Monday night, because I think we're scheduled to meet next Monday, and
More than sufficient time.
And
And
you
I don't
wouldn't
think you'd need-
necessarily have
Won't
to
be able
be
to be
there.
here.
you wouldn't need to be here necessarily.
Probably don't.
I probably don't have to be.
No.
I won't be able to be here next
You don't
month.
need to be here.
I think
You
we
wouldn't
can
need to
give
be.
you a sense of the board tonight, but we'd rather get our motion
We
right.
would work with the applicant to get the motion reflecting what
Good,
was
yeah.
reality.
He doesn't need me.
So,
Reality is an option.
so, so at this point, I wanted to ask if there was any public comment relative to this change in license at all, which I'm doubting, but I'm just asking to make sure. Doesn't seem as though there's any. So again, can I just sort of declare the public hearing closed?
Sure.
I will, we don't have a
Sure,
motion
you
to
can
that
do whatever
effect,
you
so.
want. You're the chair.
So declare.
Whatever.
So I'm declaring the
Bang your
public
gavel.
hearing closed at 7:36. And I think that what we'll do with regard to this is we'll get the updated numbers from you guys on, relative to the latest sketch. So that page 2, if you could sort of tidy that up,
Yep.
we'll get a motion next week that sort of hits the right spots, and I think we've had all our questions answered as far as.
So I should be back next Monday?
I don't think you need to come,
Okay.
Mr. Steinberg.
I mean, I just was going to say something in general nature, and that is, I really appreciate how the transition has gone to your ownership with this establishment, and I find your possibility that you immediately seized on when the sub made their decision very exciting, and I'm
Yeah.
looking forward to what you're going to be doing to make this in a better service for the community. So I don't, I mean, you're always welcome to come next week when we do the motion. I think it's going to be fairly boring, but my anticipation would be that the town manager's office will work with your attorney, and that the motion language will be agreed to, and without any need for anyone else to be here, we can just pass a motion on Monday. And I think that unless somebody else speaks up
Hey, you're
to
looking at me.
reservations, it would be the sense of the board.
He's thinking of Mr. Wald, because he's not here tonight. Yes, Ms.
He's
Brewer.
thinking Mr. Wald. Well, too bad for Mr. Wald, since he missed the hearing. So that's what I was trying to get at after we closed the hearing, was what our general sense was, so that we didn't assure you, you don't have to come back, oh, but by the way, we're going to deny it.
Yeah.
No, that's not what we were planning to do. So it's my understanding from the comments everyone has made tonight that we are satisfied with this. We're just trying to wrap up the technical details of it, and there is nothing that's going to change. We haven't any reason that anything is going to change. We've talked at length about what those details will be and what pages will get replaced, and it looks like we're all set.
So thank you all for coming in, Ms. Brewer.
You weren't here earlier when we had a review of locations for our new bike share program, but I believe one of the locations is kind of very close proximity or across the way from the Spoke, so maybe the choice of name was sort of prescient, because the Spoke is going to really work well with the,
Second oldest name in town now for,
the,
so.
Yeah.
I don't know how many bikes per stanchion, like
10,
10,
At least, yeah.
10 or 12.
10 or 12 auto assist bikes will be in a station on a cement pad, pretty
I'd
much
take this
right
line.
across.
Right across the street.
So it might be a good compliment. They're going to think, oh, they named it
Yeah.
because of the bikes.
That's right. Thank you very much for coming in.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you for coming.
I think we'll take our next item up on the agenda, which is 4C, which is percent for art bylaw special legislation. And we have in our packet materials related to that, which we discussed last time. And so we were seeking a little higher level of clarification about exactly what was suggested to us, and what our thoughts were. And so do you want to?
Yes.
An introduction to this, please, Mr. Lockwood?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So we had submitted our language for the percent for art as requested by town meeting. The state legislature, through our state representative, sent some proposed language back. Some of it was wording, and some of it was more substantive. And because it was the action by town meeting gives the select board the opportunity to accept or reject any substantive changes to it. This is coming to you. You reviewed it last time. There were 3 specific questions that the lawyer for the general court had identified, and those 3 questions were: if the town wanted to provide a longer term for borrowing for art, or simply confirming that these town assets would be borrowing in accordance with what we are already borrowing for. We reviewed these questions with town council, and on that question, the town council says it was his recommendation that there's no intention in the proposed bylaw that the term of borrowing be altered. And the second question was whether if the town wanted to include language that regarded the interest accrued on the fund and should be included as part of the fund, or would the town prefer for it to go to the general fund? And again, this is a policy decision by the board. I had recommended that the interest remain with the fund, but that's something that the board could have a conversation about. I don't anticipate that there will be a tremendous amount of interest on these funds. Then the third question was that the town was contemplating the money in the fund rolling over in the fund from year to year, and that was the anticipation, that once the funds were in the fund, that they would stay and roll over from year to year. So because it got a little complicated, I put together a motion that would capture all of those things based on language that had been recommended by the attorney for the counsel for the general court. And that's on page 2 of my memo to you.
Thank you. Ms. Brewer.
So we talked about putting the interest somewhere else.
Mhm.
Why'd you decide that?
Typically, we keep the interest with the fund where it accrues, and that just seemed to be consistent with what we've done in the past.
And then following up with the question we had about staffing, we drew some similar, not same, parallels to, say, block grant, where you're allowed to use X amount of the grant for staffing support.
Right.
There's nothing in percent for R that pays for staffing.
Correct.
So that was one of the reasons we talked about potentially moving the interest, even though it's probably way too small of a piece to
Right.
necessarily be worth accounting for to go towards staffing, that was the logic behind the question, because there's obviously going to be staffing costs associated with this, and there's no way to pay for it except not doing something else or hiring more people. So that's one of the concerns we had about this bylaw to begin with, is that it doesn't provide for any. It's just assuming somehow magically staff can continue to absorb additional tasks. So while I appreciate that, I'm also frustrated by that
Understood.
issue, because we talk about that. This select board has talked about that a lot over the years, and one of the purposes of potentially putting the interest elsewhere was to acknowledge that fact, that since the bylaw didn't take that into account, that we could at least manage it that way, and then town meeting, of course, would still make an appropriation, so.
Screw.
On the interest question, because I had raised it, I think, last time as well. I think on principle, I like the idea of thinking of the interest as some kind of offset, but in reality, I don't believe the interest is going to be so negligible, and it creates its own kind of administrative or bookkeeping burden, which then costs more money. So it's sort of a wash, and it's not worth. I might want to leave it at the discretion of some future town body to be able to look at that again, but I am kind of willing to let it go at this point, because it's more of a principle than actual real money at this point. So, thinking about it.
Mr. Steinberg, any comments or?
No, I don't really think I have anything to add to it. Ms. Kruger's comment on this.
So, Ms. Brewer, I appreciate your support on that. I agree with your perspective. I just don't know if it's worth the work.
Mr. Slaughter, if I could continue for just a moment.
Please.
So this is actually not something I double-checked for in our budget policy guidelines, but as this gets added on, again, I'm not being facetious. I mean, this is not magic. There is staff time associated
There's real
with this.
cost.
That means staff's not doing something else. And so I'm concerned about every time we choose to add something like that that doesn't have any financial assistance associated with it. So it doesn't matter how good of a bylaw it is or how good of a cause it is. What I'm talking about is the practical nature of running the program. So did that make it into the budget policy guidance? Because I'm not sure we thought of it that way
Yeah, I
at that
don't-
point.
I'm not sure I
but-
articulated it that way if I
But I'm going to
did.
check that when we get to that
Yeah,
subject.
we're going to get to that under a
We'll
different.
take that up in a bit. I will point out in the memo from the manager, under section 1C, I guess it is, monies in the fund may be expended for, and if we go down to subsection Roman numeral lowercase 9, administrative costs to manage the program, provided further that money is unused from capital building projects that are not otherwise returned to the funding source pursuant to paragraph D, which is the one that follows. So I think that
Do we feel like that does do some of that?
I don't know. Not sure if that covers it fully or not, or whether or not there's an intention to. If you
Yeah, I mean, I think that would accommodate that. I don't think my expectation is that we wouldn't take it to support a salary of someone, but if there were specific costs incurred by installing a particular piece of art, we would certainly be justified in identifying what that was for this particular project.
So there's potential for making some offset at certain times. I mean, not on a regular basis. Obviously, the year-over-year, day-over-day accounting that the finance department does is not really probably part of that. But if there was some extraordinary thing around a chunk of work related to a bonding, we might be able to incorporate a bit of that administrative cost in the project. So it has some flexibility to do some of those sorts of things if we choose to. Obviously, if we get too out of hand, it doesn't buy much art. If we spend it all on administrative things, then people will notice that. But nonetheless, there is some opportunity for some administrative costs to be recouped there, I think. I think I agree with Ms. Kruger as far as while I appreciate the workload that is associated with this, I think the interest is unfortunately going to be, because hopefully any monies accrued will be then expended fairly quickly to buy nice pieces of art. So there won't be a lot of money just sort of sitting
Or
around.
performances.
Exactly. So if there's not further comment, I'd certainly take a motion from someone, which is on the bottom of the first page of our motion sheet.
Move to approve the changes in the Home Rule petition and act to establish a public art fund in the town of Amherst, also known as Percent for Art bylaw, as recommended by Town Manager Paul Bockelman in a memorandum dated December 1, 2017, entitled Amherst Public Art Fund Legislation.
Second.
And there's a second. So is there further discussion? Did you have any comments that you wanted to offer? Feel free to step to the mic. Just identify yourself when you sit there. And
My name is Eric Brody. I'm a member of the Public Art Commission, and I endorse Ms. Kruger's comments regarding the use of the interest that's generated, and I agree with the town manager saying that the amount is not a significant amount, but since the town receives no other, our commission receives no other income for supporting public art in town, the interest is important to us, as over time we hope it will accrue to be able to support additional public art projects in town.
great. Thank you. Further discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? And that's 4-0 with one absent. Thank you. Thank you. So next on our agenda is post-town meeting actions update. Have some things to share with us.
Oh, yeah. In your packet, you have we talked about this last week. One of the actions that we discussed was the North Amherst Library and the designer selection procedure and timeline. Just as a background, I had last week met with proponents of the article that was passed by town meeting. And the article, as I told them, and I think I informed you at the time, was very specific about the work plan that needed to be undertaken. The state law is very clear about what steps we need to take. Unfortunately, they had all done their homework, and they were in agreement with the steps we knew we had to take already. So our timeframes were consistent. In short, we will be issuing a request for qualifications for a designer, and that will include a scope of work, milestones, deliverables, evaluation criteria, and determination of pricing. Our procurement officer is working on that now. We then are required to advertise that in the media and including the state central register, and that has to be posted for 2 weeks. And because of the holidays, we were going to give a couple extra weeks for people to respond, because we all want the very best designers to be responding to this request for qualifications. We'll then evaluate the proposals according to the criteria that we had already established, interview finalists, and finalize contract pricing with the top-ranked finalists. And we were hoping to have someone under contract by mid-February if everything goes according to the process that we want. There could be 2 weeks either way. We don't. So the work could commence once we select a designer, get a designer under contract, and agree on a timetable for when they would begin the work. So this work would be happening in the first half, I would anticipate, of 2018. So, and then the other thing that was mentioned was, there are 2 bylaws that have not become law yet. One is the percent for art bylaw, which we just discussed, and the other is the zero energy bylaw. Those have not been finalized by the Attorney General yet, but for this project, we anticipate that they will. We will put out there that we will alert potential designers that they should look at these and be prepared to incorporate them into any design that they would be looking at proposing. So this is a very small amount of money for something, that's going to be a larger project, but it gets the ball rolling, basically. So the idea on this was just to give you a time frame for where we were on this process.
Okay. Great. Thank you. Ms. Poole.
What you didn't include, I assume purposefully because you weren't really excited about it when I brought it up before, is that there are a number of people who think this is going to be done in time to inform decisions made at annual town meeting. Given that as you had to work out all the different deadlines associated with the number of weeks of posting, et cetera, obviously, to some extent, the designer's going to say, well, I have these other 5 things ahead of you that I'm doing. But one also hopes that plays into the criteria for picking them, for that matter, as well, because we're not going to say, oh, yeah, just do it 2 years from now. That'll be fine. So what kind of time frame are we going to be giving them? Because you're obviously going to be giving them direction as to how
Them meaning
the designer that you choose. I mean, in terms of your interviews, there's going to have to be some discussion during that time, and they're going to say, that's insane. There's no way we can do it in that amount of time. And if you hear that from, let's just imagine there are lots of applicants. If you hear that from several applicants, then you'll know that there really is just, this is how long it takes. I mean, various people who've worked in planning and who are architects, et cetera, all have their theories about how long this is going to take, but they're not the ones who are actually bidding on this. And so what I want to just be clear on is, as this process moves along, if we're getting further or closer to the idea of being ready for annual town meeting, because what I don't want is I don't want annual town meeting complaining in March, well, I was sure you were going to have it done by then. I think we are trying to make it clear that we don't know at this point, and that we shouldn't necessarily, would it be safe to say we should not assume that the data will be available?
I would
Assume the
definitely
data
not
will
assume
not
that
be
the
available.
results of this work will be ready in time for a warrant article for town meeting. I would say that that's true. That does not prohibit anyone from advancing a warrant article for the next phase of the process without having any information from this study. Whether that's wise or not is another question.
So, I'm sorry, if I could ask you to rewind what you just said. Sure. The part about petitioners, of course, can always do whatever petitioners choose to do, but in terms of coming forward, say out of the JCPC process or something else in terms of next stage, there is not the anticipation that we will have enough data to be able to meet the town meeting warrant, when the warrant's open, when the warrant closes, in order to, actually start town meeting.
Right, and also I can't speak for JCPC, whether this is a priority for JCPC as a project. Why, there are a lot of projects and a lot of priorities that JCPC takes into consideration. This will be on the capital list somewhere. When they start to look at it, they will start to weigh all these different projects that are out there. We will have additional information for this particular project, but there are, JCPC deals with lots of different demands and processes and how they weigh the value of any particular project. And we've still, have not heard the Board of Library Trustees weigh in as to where they prioritize this as well.
So in terms of people thinking about petition articles, they should be thinking about a petition article in the absence of the data from this information. I mean, realistically speaking.
Yes, that's what I would be doing.
Because it's not realistic for JCPC to have sorted out both the details of this and then how that fits in their priority list, given what they find out.
I don't think this information will not be there for JCPC to
won't
make a
be
recommendation. I
To
can't
help
imagine.
them weigh their
Can't imagine that
possibilities.
happening that fast.
I understand.
I
Okay,
don't.
I understand. I'm just trying to work it through so the
I'm kind
public's
of,
not
I'm
confused.
confused because why would anyone in town meeting ever have made that assumption? This is actually pretty quick response to something that was passed at the special town meeting. And the processes that are in there pretty much regulated by state law are pretty prescriptive. And for this kind of work, there would be totally unrealistic to think that anything would be ready for the annual town meeting. So we're not building towards a spring action. I mean, JCPC is going to, I'm guessing, look at a bunch of projects and kind of juggle them and say, where do they fit in and what's the sequencing for these projections out. But if somebody was looking at this thinking quick turnaround, it just isn't how government-regulated design work happens.
Well, the thing I think about is just to do the design work alone, if it's mid-February, presuming 6 weeks, that's beginning of April. Town
Yeah,
meeting starts at
we're-
the end of
we're into-
April. So it's,
May, June, maybe.
right.
yeah.
So following up, and I'm not arguing.
And you just
No, no,
want
no.
to, you want to be
I'm saying,
clear about
realistically,
expectations.
I think there were a lot of people whose hearts and minds were hoping it was just a short list. It would be relatively straightforward.
Really?
But there's all these rules that we have to follow. And so, and we are working very quickly after town meeting ended and the holidays, et cetera. So reminding people that miscellaneous petitions are due February 5th. So if someone really wants to do something for annual town meeting action, this annual town meeting, that's what they're going to have to do. And they're going to have to end up doing it in the absence of the information from this study. And they're also going to have to be doing it at the same time that JCPC's been discussing what the overall priorities are as well, which they can do without these details. It will just inform them more as time moves along.
Just as so I think the people who I met with were cognizant of the time frame
Good.
and expectations were we were in line with our expectations. So I think they had done their homework. They said it's going to take this amount of time on as quickly as the town can move. They know I think they were aware of the rules, and when they came up with their list, it's pretty much matched where we thought we would be too.
Excellent.
So.
Do you have something else, Mr.
I
Sapp?
mean, I guess the other question that I have is that this process has gone in a different time path than most projects. And so you made reference to the trustees in a library project. You would have normally had the trustees involved in an earlier stage of the process because the trustees have to be consulted and the staff has to be consulted about what the cost is to operate the facility they have to factor that into both their understanding of what the need is from the operational side and also their budget capacity to support those operating costs as they are determined, and that gets factored into design usually when you're doing the initial design. And I was wondering how that gets plugged in now to this process, which is going in a different time path because of the way it arose.
Well, I mean, that's, operational considerations have not been taken into account in moving this project forward. So that's clearly a conversation that has not happened with town meeting's action. Those questions are being raised. The trustees will have to determine what are the operating costs. Right now we have minimal staffing there. Does it require additional staffing? There are a lot of unknowns in this project. I think everybody recognizes that. We don't know if or how the zero energy bylaw will apply to this. That there are differences of opinion as to whether it would apply to this or not, determining on how I would be interpreting that bylaw, and the bylaw is not crafted in a way that makes it really clear. So those are questions that we're also working on, trying to clarify that so everybody has a shared understanding of what that bylaw means, or else clarifying that bylaw, which requires a town meeting action to clarify it so that we know if it applies or not to this project. So there are a lot of unknowns as we start to move forward, and I think that's a really hard environment to be projecting out expenses for capital projects when you don't know answers to these questions. We need to get clarification on those.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments relative to that part of town meeting action follow-up? I think the other thing that's in our packet from with regard to town meeting sort of actions and follow-up is that we notified the Senator Rosenberg and Representative Goldstein Rose and the chair of the Ag Commission, the series of letters. And Mr. Kravitz also has sent a notice to the chair of the Cannabis Control Commission relative to the actions of town meeting and in relation to the zoning that we set in place for recreational marijuana and the other articles associated with that. And so that's in our packet. Is there anything you wanted to add relative to that?
Not to that, but I have one other thing for town meeting follow-up, is the town clerk was still, she had anticipated sending the actual bylaws that were passed by town meeting, the zoning and the general bylaws, to the Attorney General today, but they will go out tomorrow because she was still gathering the information from the planning board.
Great. Ms. Brewer, you had something on the...
So on the marijuana issue, and so again, our internal working group with Ms. Brestrup and Ms. Fetterman and Mr. Kravitz and Mr. Bockelman and Ms. Kruger and myself. So yes, we worked on these letters, and as you can see, we put some of them for your signature and one of them for Mr. Kravitz's signature because we thought it was important to update everybody as to where we ended up. And as I pointed out, that I want them to be looking to Mr. Kravitz as an expert of a municipal group that's doing stuff, that's not just waiting to find out, since we had good advice from KP Law and from all the different seminars, et cetera, that people have been going to, so that other people can start looking to us for suggestions on how to write their bylaws. And that's why we made it clear which things were select board articles, which things were planning board articles, et cetera, because we're just trying to be the experts, and we are in many respects. And so we're trying to be super helpful to other communities, and that's why we went ahead and did that as a separate page so that people could just pull that out and say, here's what Amherst did.
Right.
And make it clear where we're going with things. And then associated with the Agricultural Commission, we wanted to make sure, since these little questions pop up here and there about hemp and about, of course, with Amherst farming community, what we might have in terms of artisanal grows, et cetera. A lot of that's really unclear still, but some of it is going to be covered by the regulations. And so we wanted to make sure, just based on the cycle of farming, because we are thinking that potentially some of the people who are talking about farming are talking about outdoors as opposed to all the medical marijuana that's being grown indoors, that it would mess up them in terms of being able to figure out when they would start their grow if they didn't have any idea what's going on. So we said, tell us if you are thinking about something so that we would be ready for it. But at this point, that's not one of the things we wanted to try and get in front of because it's even less clear. what the ground's going to look like on that, although we'll have a better idea in a couple of weeks.
Well, and to that point, I believe the 12th of this month is the targeted next meeting of the Ag Commission if they can get a quorum, which requires all the current members to be there to get a quorum. So I believe the 12th is the date that's currently being circulated amongst the membership to see if they can all attend. And so if they do, they will probably have this on their agenda.
Good.
Not I'll
So that
bring it up
everybody
when I go,
knows what's going on.
so that everyone's on the same page with regard to that. Was there anything else related to town meeting? I think that was it. It was mostly we just wanted to touch base on sort of the mechanical things that had to take effect. Yes.
So I'm, because we ran late last time, and I don't intend for us to do that again tonight, but with the chair's indulgence, I'm not sure that we got through all the town meeting debrief the comments that people wanted to make. We wanted to make sure we have this excellent way that Mr. Bachman now tracks all these things for us, like telling us when the bylaws are going out, making sure we have these memos, which is way more information than we used to have, so thank you very much for that. And then in terms of just our trying to figure things out going forward. I mean, we, for example, talked about, we changed the petition deadlines. We talked about the theory of maybe, and it's a maybe at this point, that we might have something that looks similar to a hearing, although not with a big H, but with a little h, on bylaws, just so that the general community knows more about, rather than just wedging it in with all the other things that we do on our agendas. And so I wonder if, I mean, that in particular, for example, is something for our, I think for a parking lot, so to speak, associated with agenda items, because of course that'll be yet another thing that takes up time on an agenda as we're moving into town meeting. But with the dates being earlier,
Right,
that
there
will
should
help a
be-
little bit
Right, you should
in
have a
terms of
bigger
us
window for
having more
that.
time to schedule that rather than trying to cram it into 2 or 3 weeks, because we always have that problem with annual town meeting because of the school break week and Patriots Day.
I think just if I may piggyback on that for a moment, I think the idea of having a hearing set aside dedicated to any bylaw change is a better process than we've had in the past. And I think because it does affect the community as a whole, a bylaw could be about anything. I mean, the more recent ones were more, sort of inside town hall kind of as far as their effect, but certainly that's not always the case. So this gives the community as a whole to sort of weigh in and offer comment a little more easily or in a more focused way than we've done in the past, which I think will be helpful as the conversations move forward after that. So I think that is also a good bit of additional process we've been talking about here. Ms. Kruger.
Well, just to follow up, it doesn't have to be expanded per se tonight, but we already touched on the zero net energy bylaw, and I'm just wondering what kind of path we see for working on possibly modifying that, or how to modify a flawed bylaw so that the petitioners feel that the main emphasis is maintained, but while town administration feels like it's something that can be practical and applied in the real world and be legal and all of that. So I think that whole topic is ripe for some kind of ongoing negotiation. And it doesn't have to be tonight, but I'm looking to the manager to sketch out a path for us on that, because that was a pretty big issue, big item and I don't consider it done by any means.
So internally, Steph, we have had a meeting about the zero energy bylaw and trying to interpret the words that the town meeting passed. It's confusing, to say the least, and not clear on a lot of the different things. And I just, through other people telling me, oh, this is what they meant, that when you read the words, it might not exactly mean that. So I think there's a lot of room for a conversation to happen with that. My sense is that conversation will, by necessity, include the select members of the select board to represent the town and staff to help articulate what the issues are, and then trying to have that. I think that's having a good conversation about it. I think a model, again, goes with public art, because that went to town. I think it took a while to get that right, and I think now we're in a level of comfort with that we know what it means, and when we have to take action on it. So I think that would be something that the select board would be the the holder of that or some representation from the select board to initiate that dialogue. And I'm not sure exactly who, from the proponent side, who we would have that conversation with and who is authorized to speak, because I think that was a challenge for the proponents as well, because there was a lot of support for it from a lot of different areas. So I'm not sure who is the spokesperson, if there is one, for the advocates for that article.
So if I could ask a sort of follow-up question, just, so that bylaw will be sent to the Attorney General's office, they'll offer comment on it. Is there likely to be particular things that they find that they will feed back to us as far as complications or difficulties, or is their process not as detailed as that?
I don't think it's as detailed as that. I think they just look to see if it complies with state law and is constitutional. And that I don't think they're going to say change this section or that. If it's, we're not asking the state to do anything other than, is this step on any other state laws or anything like that. So
Okay, just curious. How much
I
comment they
don't think we'll see much from them.
Right.
So just to follow up so we can finish up with it for tonight, it would seem to me that having a small team for the town, select board representation, manager perhaps, or as designee, and the important staff people, and then trying to set out some outlines for meetings with petitioners in terms of number of people invited to come and how creating some ground rules for those conversations. So, and I don't see them as being public or needing to be public. Wouldn't be a quorum of this board for sure. But to start, maybe look to the manager to create an outline of what that composition would be, and thinking that that's a project we're going to have to take on over the next coming months, of both suggesting changes and then working with that group or some representatives to see how far we can get in making changes that make it more workable. And, yeah, because it's really easy to get distracted off.
Right.
That's really important.
Right, but town meeting will be here before we know it.
It always is. Yes.
Any other comment on that, or
Or I just have some completely
different
random
things that you want to bring
lists.
up?
Yeah, that I
So-
had got some last time, and I just wanted to shoot some out this time.
For one
Yeah,
second, I
well.
just wanted to ask the manager, given Ms. Kruger's suggestion about sort of framing this a little bit, do you have a sense of when you might sort of have your head around that a little bit?
Yeah, I'll try to do it before the end of the year here,
Okay,
next week or two.
okay.
Sure.
That's fine. Ms. Brewer?
Right.
Please, that's
So
why we
these
put it on the
are,
agenda.
so we have just, a couple generic things. So one of the complaints we used to get is how long it took to get mics to people. And then when people would complain that we didn't have enough mics, and then we keep telling them it was because there are only so many ports or whatever to attach them to. So that's some of these kinds of follow-up things. So I'm not talking about that in particular right now, but that kind of thing. And one of those is we seem to have a really uneven level of preparation for when things are called the question, when we're calling the question, and how long it takes to get votes up on the screen. And so if we can just assure people that we're continuing to work on streamlining that process, I'm assuming the software isn't quite as friendly as it might be, and that it can be difficult for staff, but staff should assume that calling the question is going to happen a lot.
Right.
And so at one point, it took like more good solid 3 minutes for us all to just sit there for a simple call the question to be brought up on the screen. And it just frustrates people because they like when things are moving along with the pace, and even though we haven't gone to yet having a bylaw that says everything will be electronically voted. So just that feedback, like I said, I know they're working hard at it, and I know it's complicated, but anything they can do to fix things like that. One of the other questions that's come up that if you could just let us know an answer to at some point, which is that at one point when we were testing systems, and this may have even been the first time we were testing systems, way, way before your time, is that it could show a screen, a projection that said which devices have registered a vote. not what they voted, but which devices have registered to vote. So people could see, look, I have device 241 in my hand. It says 241 voted. That was a thing that was possible, and I'm wondering if it's worth, whether talk to the moderator, talk to TMC. I assume this software is capable of doing that, but that would prevent people from saying, later, when the results come out, it's too late. So if your device didn't register and you thought it did, and then you see the next day that it's printed that you didn't vote, too bad. And so that might be a simple way of doing that, is you look up, because when in the classrooms, at least years ago, when they started using these things, they would do that, because that was a way of taking attendance, right? Everybody's here. I can see their numbers are up there. So that would be helpful to find out. And just another assurance of things, so we don't have so many questions about what things we're waiting for. And how might it be appropriate? We've done letters in the past where we've written to TMCC when there was stuff that we thought TMCC should do, and I'm not necessarily sure that any of the stuff we've been talking about over the last couple of weeks is something like that, or asking the moderator to do something differently. But the one thing I thought we might figure out a way to ask the planning board is, we had noticed that they don't schedule pre-town meeting sessions like we do and like the finance committee sometimes does. And that puts them at a disadvantage when they know an amendment's coming, they've heard it in the ether, but they don't have a meeting posted. So they can't possibly get together and decide, right, that maybe, just as we have developed that habit, finance committee doesn't do it for every single meeting, but sends to do it at least once a week, just in case that kind of thing comes up, just to say, you probably could do that, because they really just need a
If they
forum.
have an article, you mean? Or
Well, they always
anytime?
have articles. I mean, that's the part.
I think the planning board didn't have the opportunity to take a position. I'm trying to remember what the article was, and they weren't able. I think we had done. Well, I was totally forgetting everything we did.
Oh,
at town
they
meeting.
couldn't talk about whether or not to dismiss. An article was one of the issues.
Oh, for the
because-
moratorium, so
because
on the
they are-
marijuana.
right.
So if nights that they're on, and that might have been hard because we didn't know that was going to be continued. We thought we were going to finish them all. But say the night when we thought we were doing them all, if they had planned a half an hour posted meeting, they could have taken that consideration, because they only meet twice a month, and they didn't have a chance to go back and look at that before town meeting happened.
Well, and there are times when there are amendments that are known about in advance of an article coming forward that they know are going to be offered, have been given to the moderator in advance, that they might also take up.
They don't have that kind of habit, so
Right.
but that would be
Right.
something that the manager could talk to the planning director. But what was the other board? You said planning board, and what was the other one?
TMCC?
They could have posted meetings, like planning board and.
Wait, I have no idea what you're talking
Oh,
about
what
now.
you just said, did you mention which board should do that?
No, I was
Oh.
mentioning planning board. No, I was
Just
referring to
planning.
TMCC only from the standpoint that we used to write them a letter.
No,
I'm
I
not sure we had to
understood.
write a
I
whole
understood.
letter to
Then
the
you talked
planning
about
board.
Boards
Right.
knowing that they could meet ahead of time, okay.
Right, but just
Okay.
that it would be helpful for the planning board to consider adding that. And, you could show them our sample agenda of any key updates kind of thing, because then they might not get quorum, and they don't even really need a room. They could meet right there in the front of the auditorium.
Gives them that
So,
opportunity.
not make a huge deal out of it for them, but
They're legal if they
to
do
give them a
need to talk,
choice.
right?
And what else? Exactly. So come on, you guys. I know you have something else to say.
Seems like months ago now.
It does now. Well, it is a month ago now. Exactly. So that was the main thing. And the other is that it was brought to my mind, and again, since we're not writing, to the best of my knowledge, we're not writing a letter to TMCC, and this is more perhaps than just the kind of thing that we can't really talk about anyplace else, because we're supposed to talk about these things at a posted meeting, is I think it's really interesting that we have chosen, one, when we wrote our bylaw, to not mandate electronic voting for every vote. There were reasons that people decided that's not what they wanted to do. But beyond that, there's also no mandate to cast a vote. And since we have yes, no, and abstain, that would be useful. It was shocking to me to see the number of people who had checked in at town meeting at some point during the night and then didn't cast any vote on several issues. It was 20, 30% in some cases. And so some of them might have left early, some of them might have been in the bathroom. I mean, there are places you could be when the vote happens. But I wonder if that's something TMCC might think about as they continue to talk about ways of making things more transparent, and also people feeling more confident that their votes are being registered, is that if you would actually just vote on everything rather than just having checked in, but then the whole line shows up as blank for you. And abstain obviously does register. So it's just a theory.
Just to follow, that reminded me of something, it's a little different than that. Believe, from time to time, the moderator reminds people that town meeting members should be seated on the, the three sections on what we call on the floor. And I've noticed that a number of people have taken to sitting up in the back section on either side and not even coming down to vote. I mean, they can use the device from the gallery spaces, and to me, it sort of sounds schoolmarmish, but it bothers me that people aren't sitting on the floor who are elected town meeting members, that they're choosing to sit. Like sometimes you go back there to have a conversation and you come forward, and so I'm going to be too strict about it, but I think we've lost the sense that if you're a town meeting member, you sit with the rest of the town meeting members in the general audience.
Right. I mean, just to follow up a question on your earlier thing about the number of non-voters, is, does that beg the question of whether or not if someone leaves early, whether or not that should be recorded, in as much as they check in, do they check out, record a time? Just, again, just to sort of make the votes tally up to the number of people there. Not that we're checking quorum per se, or if someone needs to step to the restroom per se, that sort of thing, but I don't know if that's part and parcel of that as well. Like you say, as far as confident in the vote and that your machine, the device worked the way you expected it to,
Can't make them vote.
What's that?
You can't make people vote if they're.
No, you can't.
Well, you
but
can.
That is the,
If your bylaw says
Good
that
luck
you
with
will
it.
do it,
You will vote.
well,
you will
can,
cast a vote. It could be an abstention.
it can be an extension, but I mean,
Different.
it is
Session's different.
the whole point of town meeting is to do a bunch of voting, but.
Right. I
I
mean,
get
we
it.
don't sit here and just not vote on certain issues and not write them down as
So-
abstains or absences. We don't just say, oh, 3 people voted. What happened to the other 2? I don't know, maybe they were in the bathroom. Like, what? We don't do it that way.
I think maybe, recording, when the device is turned in, or something that would encourage people to do it, but I think saying you shall vote is, I'm not ready to go there.
Right.
Well, okay
You
then.
can-
Obviously, you're just not as bossy as I am. So when we have.
Depends on the issue.
Perhaps that's the answer.
Match you.
Thank you for letting this be relatively free-flowing, Mr. Slaughter. I will try and behave better next.
It's all right.
Do we have on our retreat agenda something talking about how to talk about one of our favorite topics, how to talk about things, in terms of staff and town manager, both voting in the town manager's case, but also in general in terms of how we might strategize as to when they might speak at town meeting? Not that we can force them to speak, but that we were looking for their expertise on certain articles. You
Yes.
got that on the retreat
We
agenda?
did.
Excellent. That's what I
Include
wanted to
that.
know.
Just make a comment. The way I believe the retreat agenda is, it's not that specific, but it has a category for that to fit under.
Trying to make anybody do anything, just trying to share our expectations. Share our expectations.
If you don't vote, a little electric shock.
So are there other things related to town meeting that anyone wanted to mention as far as think about what we need to do or how we need to follow up and try to do things better? If not, then why don't we move on to the fiscal
Thank you.
2019 budget policy guidelines? Which again, there was a draft. Even if you get the watermark just right, you can actually see it say draft across it,
Oh, it does.
which was intentional because I was working from my notes, which was, to say the least, not ideal in some respects, but hopefully captured the essence of what people were trying to get conveyed in this document, which is in part for the manager and in part for the general public in its purpose. So does, hopefully I gave you copies that made sense to kind of see the progression from last year's to now, the one in front of us. And so I am taking any comments or suggestions about language change.
I'll offer a comment on the comments, and that is that I think you did a great job of encapsulating the discussion from the last meeting. I did look at the redlined version to see the changes that were made, and I thought you did an excellent job of capturing the discussion of the last meeting. And I have no further suggestions whatsoever. I would like to see us get this done.
You should bask in that compliment.
Well, thank you.
What?
I just have one clarification, and that's under 1N, as in
Yep.
neighbor. I just want to make sure I understand what that means. It says several town meeting actions in the past year will have negative implications for the creation of the budget for FY19 as well as future budgets. Integrating these into the existing budget processes as well as understanding the potential impacts on other town services is important to creating strategies for developing sustainable budgets in FY19 in the years ahead. So it says integrating these into the existing budget. Is there a presumption that if town meeting took an action in the past, that action will be as a sustaining action? So for instance, if there was $60,000 appropriated for community services, is it the board's assumption that that's something that should be sustained over time or not?
I didn't want to imply necessarily that circumstance. What I was attempting to capture within that was for things like a bylaw change.
Okay.
That has a sustainable impact, or percent for art. That's more of what I was thinking of.
Okay.
I think those others that have come up, more singular appropriations, which do have the intention, I think sometimes along, is to foster conversation about whether it should be sustained or
Okay.
not, is still conversations we continue to have over time. But the ones I was particularly indicating with that was things like the bylaw change.
Oh, that's good then. I understand that then.
Yes, Ms. Brewer.
Can we make that clearer then?
Absolutely.
Because I think people will be reading that and may make that assumption about the 60,000, or if it's
Or the 105,000.
whatever year's money it is for
So it's-
whatever little things that it is. And so perhaps the word negative is not necessarily the word we wanted either.
Say that again, sorry.
Perhaps we
negative.
did not want the word negative.
You could just say have implications, you don't need the word negative.
Okay.
I mean, it's adding to the negative balance. I get that. It's a very straightforward number from that standpoint.
Right, that's what it means.
But at the same time,
Yeah.
it's perhaps too much of a red flag to people. So,
Yes.
For you, so in explaining, and that makes sense, but when you say several town meeting actions, do you mean town meeting actions changing bylaws?
Well, I think,
Because that's how you described it. I mean,
I
if you
described
want
it
to be
that way, but
narrow,
I actually, in some respects, it's both. It is both, bylaws and particular appropriations. So I said actions to be broad in that regard,
Okay.
but some of the action, where it breaks down a little bit is when you think about the sort of future budgets part, which really implies more the bylaw changes, because those are systemically now impacting those future budgets, whereas single appropriation may or may not, depending on how we choose to act.
So my confusion
forward.
came at the integrating these into the existing budget. It made it felt that was implied that a bylaw, I understand, but an appropriation would be different. Or any action that's not a bylaw changes a law, so we get that.
Right.
But if there's an action by town meeting in particular to do one thing or not do something, does that imply that's now set as a standard?
I'm taking any suggestions about how to
I'm
phrase
not
that.
gonna,
differently.
I'm not going to suggest language, but the way I was interpreting that is that I was assuming that the need for the funding and the ability to continue to funding it will at least be considered in the process. Not that it will be an outcome that necessarily will have it in the budget for a succeeding year, because each year you're charged with the responsibility for looking at a totality of needs and a totality of available resources and making the best judgments possible. And I hope that it doesn't imply that it be given a priority over other priorities, just that it be considered.
I think, if I might,
Yes.
I made a word change, and I picked up the word you just said twice, considering or consideration. So I would change integrating into considering these actions in the existing budget processes as well as understanding the potential. So it's about considering them. It doesn't say, I think integrating them leads to the confusion that I think Mr. Bachman rightly pointed out, but
Could you read that one more time? Considering these.
yeah, considering these actions in the existing budget processes. You can consider them and go, no, not adding, or,
It's not ignoring them.
yeah, you've taken them into consideration.
It's not saying you should integrate.
Yes.
Yeah, I agree.
So we were both channeling consideration rather than integrating.
Right.
And then you delete the word negative in the first sentence.
Yep.
Those
And
three
then-
changes.
We can we can adopt this as
It's
amended.
amended, yeah. Any other
Don't look for it.
edits? Typos?
Point
There was
me,
a typo in the last one, but anyway, yes.
point me again toward any place that we're talking about maintenance other than the very small mention of it on page 4, top of the page, item C.
Maintenance of,
Where else is it?
maintenance of,
Our existing assets and infrastructure. So the phrase is correct. It's just not got as much emphasis as I would like. We would like to see, it says currently, in support of a community concern, we'd like to see additional money put toward road and sidewalk paving, as well as other capital investments in maintenance of our existing assets and infrastructure. What I'm trying to clarify is we need a plan. We need something that's starting to show us. It doesn't have to be, I'm not talking about a 20-page plan. I'm talking about starting to make reference to, we know we're not getting a grant for such and such thing. This is how we need to make sure that all the playground equipment at each of the parks gets a lump sum every year to deal with. The swings are broken, the bolts need to be replaced, the special engineered mulch needs to be redone. Sometimes that ends up in the JCPC plan, but usually not until it's kind of a crisis. And so what I tried to get at last time is I recognize that there's not one size fits all, that some things are going to be within operating budget, some things will be within the capital budget, but there needs to be a place that we can say, here's where you look if you're trying to find out if we're putting any money into maintaining Sweetser Park in terms of ongoing maintenance versus a catastrophic fix, like we have to redo the whole sidewalk.
Yeah, I went back and forth about how to,
Yeah.
and that's, it sort of got distilled to its essence there, which is why it's so brief, but,
I don't need to re-wordsmith it as long as Mr. Bachman's hearing it, assuming that other people agree with me in the general sense, because otherwise it doesn't belong in here if I'm the only one who thinks it. But
so we have talked about those items. I have not looked to say, here's a line item for Sweetser Park, because I think that goes against where we want to be. But we have talked about, for instance, playground equipment. What is our, we are looking at Groff Park. What's our next, we need to get all those like that type of thing on the schedule so we know when we're doing it. There already is funds, if there has been playground equipment very recently that's been identified as being a problem, so we go out and fix it. We have money, plenty, we're fine on doing that. We've had a discussion about wood chips and whether that should be a called out capital item, or is that should we just put that into the operating budget and make sure that just gets done every year? So And there, I think JCPC may even had that conversation about whether wood chips should be a separate line item or not, because it's $5,000 that we do for all of our playgrounds. And there's a sense with JCPC, or I believe, that it's like, that's not a capital item. That's an ongoing expense. We should be integrating those into the operating budgets. The challenge with that for this year, which we're struggling with right now, is this the year to be bumping up operating expenses because this would take it out of capital and put it into operating. And I'm not sure if we really want to be doing that this year, but it's something we're talking about. And we are collapsing a bunch of items into one sort of maintenance line item that'll show up on the capital budget. That'll say maintenance of recreational facilities or something like that.
Equipment maintenance.
Yes, that'll include wood chips and a number of other things that happen every year.
That bucket of bolts to fix.
The bucket of bolts.
Because to be fair, in past years, we haven't literally had that done. We have not had a swing to put up instead because the swing's broken, and no one's going to look if the swing's broken. No one's noticing that the swing's broken until a resident brings it to our attention after it's been like that for 2 weeks. And so part of it's a renewed attitude, focus on that, knowing that everybody's super busy, but finding a way that they're saying we're proactively noticing things like this, whether it's the restrooms at the various places, et cetera, always being another big one. Or, and then like you say, rather than saying, this much money for this many bricks at Sweetser Park, but just to give people a general sense that these are pockets we're putting in there on purpose because we know we need to more consistently, because I would argue we've not at all consistently addressed those needs. And so if we are going to do it, whatever method you want to do it by, but that's something that shows. And so if later you just say in text somewhere, we're doing it more consistently, I'll be good with that.
Yeah, so you'll hear sustainability, and it's taking care of the things that we already have. And that's where a large emphasis of our budget hearings has been, rather than going out and buy new things, let's take care of what we have already and make that our priority, because that's where we are. We have a lot of things that we haven't taken care of, and we need to take better care of those things.
I think that reflects the spirit of C, 5C. So I don't know if we need to.
No, I
calculate.
think as long as we all agree on what it means, we're good.
We're on the same page.
Whereas a slight amount of wordsmithing on N was probably the way to go.
I agree. I would be happy to entertain a motion.
Before we change our mind,
We can continue to modify, we can continue to amend after the motion's made, but it sounds like we're
okay,
kind of,
I found it.
yeah, it's on the back of the page, top of
Yes.
the back page.
I move to approve the budget policy guidelines dated November 20th, 2000.
It's December 4th.
I was wondering if, as I didn't spend enough time reviewing.
They got
it.
a-
It was a theory at one point.
Yeah, didn't get changed, but that's fine, we carried forward. I move to approve the budget policy guidelines dated December 1st, 2007, December 4th, 2000, what's the date on it?
Should be December 4th, 2017.
Yeah, where did I say what?
Today's date.
And we'll
Yeah,
say as
today,
amended.
as being today, December 4th, 2017, for fiscal year 2019, as amended.
Is there a second?
Second.
Right. Is there further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye. Yeah. Thank you.
Well done.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Ton of work.
So, I believe at this point, we're potentially ready for our consent calendar. So, Mr. Sonder, did you have something in particular you wanted to bring up
Yeah,
about
I
that?
just had two questions to pose that I knew there was long, but the list that we got today on our tables has failed to renew by two of the applicants that are then crossed off. I assume that if either of those businesses comes in and files an application at a later date, we still have the opportunity to consider, or not?
Yeah, so these are the ones that we have received. They're supposed to sign them by November 30th. For one in particular, Bon Appetit, they said they sent it. What came in the mail was their Board of Health certificate. So whether they mailed the wrong thing to us or they mailed it to the wrong location, we're not sure. But we don't have the material necessary for that one. We don't anticipate that Fratelli's or Lumberyard are going to renew.
Well, and to follow up, so the thing with Bon Appetit is if they do decide, I mean, there's a deadline with the ABCC.
Right.
It's not up to us to flex the deadline. They know what the deadline is. They just apparently send not the
Right.
right
So,
thing.
so the deadline is when they have to sign it. It's not when we receive it, although we act on it as soon as we receive it. So,
They can't submit something to us in January saying they signed it in November.
right, right. So,
And it's not going to get into the ABCC system. I'm
Right.
confused. But in theory, staff is trying to help them as best they possibly can, and that's all.
yes, and this is, yeah.
So I have no further questions on subpart D of the consent calendar. On our subpart A of the consent calendar, subpart D, are there any changes from the prior year in the agreement, either in the wording or in the amount of money that's involved?
No.
Okay, thank you. That's it.
So if there are no further questions, if someone would like to make a motion relative to the consent calendar.
I do have a question, I guess, in this regard to ask Ms. Kruger, and that is, since she may need to abstain regarding license renewals, should we split this into two motions?
We certainly can.
I am going to abstain on the license renewal.
So why don't we pull that's A, right? Why don't we pull
Yes.
that part out and make it as a separate motion and then do consent calendar
Okay.
without A? And then
I
we'll do A.
move to approve the items listed on the consent calendar, subparts B, C, and D, for the November 4, 2017 agenda as presented.
Second.
There's a second. Any further discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. That's unanimous. And so if you want to make a motion for the loan,
I think I can just move to approve the renewal of annual licenses for calendar year 2018 as listed in the agenda of December 4, 2017.
and is there a second? Ms. Brewer? Second. Thank you. Is there any further discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. And one abstention and one absence. So this is 3 abstain, 1 absent. All right, so I think that gets us through the specifically listed items within our agenda. I'm sorry, I forgot you would ask to take a recess. Do we still need to, or?
Unless you want it to be part of the meeting.
There's just no good way to talk about that. Let's just-
Because we certainly can, if you would need a minute or two.
So Ms. Brewer brought a cake. She's obviously not putting candles on it because that would be totally inappropriate in the town room. So we're going to have some cake. There's a cake back there.
Awesome.
So,
Break.
yeah, let's take a quick break.
So why don't we take a short recess?
Should we sing?
And
No.
I work with some people that require singing. They are like adamant about it, but nonetheless, we'll take a short recess, perhaps even give a piece of cake to our friends from Amherst Media.
That would be a really good idea. I was thinking that.
So thank you for bringing cake. Happy birthday. So we'll join our meeting after our short break for a little bit of cake, celebrating the birthday of one of our members, Ms. Brewer. Happy birthday. So next on our agenda is the town manager's report. So
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
take it away.
So a few things. You received a written report, which has also been uploaded to the packet. The Cup of Joe with Paul is continuing on Friday, December 8th. I'll be at the Bangs Community Center from 7:30 to 10 in the morning with Library Director Sharon Sherry. So if anybody wants to talk about anything, they're welcome to come to that. The one after that will be January 12th, where I will be with our finance directors, at least one of them, because that'll be the day after we present our budget. And so that'll be an opportunity for people who have seen our presentation on the budget to have any kind of comments that they would like to make on the budget. The charter, and I'll run through some highlights, and since you've had a chance to look at it, you can come back to anything you want. The charter has been, was supposed to be delivered today, but it definitely is going to be delivered tomorrow morning to the post office, and which means it will be distributed this week. So that's moving forward. What else? The winter parking, we're moving forward on that. The last time I reported on it, that we were waiting for some material to come in to put up the blue lights. Everything is at the DPW now. Those blue lights are all being installed this week. They should be all up this week. We're also have arranged for the police department on certain nights. They'll start doing some educational flyers. Well, they will drive around and put flyers on cars that are parked in the public way to say, if this had been a snowstorm, you would have been towed. So be aware. Here's how you learn about whether it's a snowstorm or not. So I think that will be very effective. We'll do that a few nights during the winter, during this early December. The town hall clock has been, they were working on it all day today, left a few minutes before our meeting, and they do not have it operational yet. They're coming back on Thursday with the final parts that they need to repair it, and then it should be up and running. And really, they've taken it all apart and reassembled it, retooled a lot of the pieces to it, so the town hall clock should be running quite well starting Thursday. In your packet, attached to my report is a training material that the Human Resources Department had organized on sexual harassment, that all of our supervisors and our managers have attended. It was an all-day session, 3 different sessions, so that everybody could attend. Practically everybody did attend. I think this was scheduled back in August, and it was never more timely. And I think people took it more seriously than normal. We always take it very seriously, but I think there was a certain attention that people were bringing to the training this time. And we had our town council from KP Law do the presentation, and I attended as well, and it was a very, very good thing. If you recall, I mentioned that we had the salamander incident at our water treatment plant. We have reviewed the administrative consent order. Town council has reviewed it, and I just signed it today. So we have agreed to the consent order, which requires us to do certain things and to pay a fine of $5,000 because of this incident. We also have agreed to do some trainings and things like that we're very willing to do. The Department of Transportation is proposing some road construction changes on Northampton Road. That's Route 9 from South Pleasant Street to the Hadley line. They have now come up with their plan, what they call 25% plans, and we're reviewing those. But it calls for a multi-use path on the north side of Northampton Road. So while it's still not set in stone, we are working with them. This will be important to us as there are water lines and maybe wastewater lines that we'll want to repair at the same time. This is a project that won't happen for 2 years, but their planning is going on now. In addition to that, PVTA or the Department of Transportation are looking at ways to increase the speed of the B43 bus, which runs between Northampton and Amherst. And they've made some suggested changes. We had a meeting today to talk a little bit about that, and we'll be reaching out to other stakeholders to see if we agree that the proposal we saw, which did not come from PVTA but came from the Department of Transportation, was to eliminate several stops in downtown Amherst, which we would be opposed to. But we'd like to work with the proponents to try and figure out a way to make it more efficient, increase the speed of the bus, things like that. There are a number of issues that this raises. The Transportation Advisory Committee is having their meeting tomorrow night on the crosswalks, which they had distributed to all the boards in town. If people had any comments on them, and so that I think that's I think the design that's based on is the design that was installed in front of the Jones Library on Amity Street. We've received a lot of positive feedback, but this is an opportunity for everybody to weigh in from the planning board. Eventually, they're an advisory committee to you, so they'll be bringing their recommended design to you for your final approval. Let's see, that we contracted with the Pioneer Valley Planning Commission to conduct the economic development plan, which is being paid for out of a grant from the state. When we became a Commonwealth Community Compact, we had our first meeting last week on that, and so we anticipate that work will be done. It's starting now and will be conducted through January and February, and maybe March. I think we go into March. Board of Health, our health director and our town nurse have been very active in managing the meningitis outbreak at UMass, and they have been assisting UMass in trying to help inoculate as many of inoculate as many students as possible. There's thousands of students that have to be inoculated, so they've been helping out on that. The North Common, we talked a little bit about that in the past, and that's moving forward as well. A lot of people have an interest in this, and so it'll go through lots of a very large process, including the Design Review Board, the Historical Commission, the Planning Board, the LSSC Commission, the Conservation Commission, the Public Shade Tree, and of course the Select Board, because it is a public way. You have the ultimate authority over that. We have sketched out a time frame for when we can do it. The best time for us to do the construction is from basically June to mid-August, and it's about probably a 2-month or a 10-week project, and it's very tight for us to get a June start. If we can, we're going to push it for 2018, and that's going to be our operating assumption. If we can't, and it slides a little bit too late, then we might either segment the project so we get the common part done, and it includes the common and the Main Street parking lot, which we'll rehab and clean up the sidewalks around it and put in lighting and do all kinds of really great things. At this iteration, we do not think it'll have any impact on the farmers market on the Spring Street lot. There might be a construction fence that has to go up or something like that, but pretty much Spring Street will be segregated out. But we will lose parking in the Main Street parking lot for a number of weeks, and that will be and we are trying to do it in the summer because that's when that lot is used the least. So the other option for us is if we get all the design and everything done and bidding, and then it gets too late in the year, we'll just do construction in the following year. But it's a very tight time frame. Groff Park moving along, again, following a similar schedule, looking for construction in the summer of 2018. That's not as sensitive, although we are cognizant of construction during the summer there, and we're thinking of doing the construction in mid-August so that we don't lose the park during the summer. So we would have that all bid out and everything ready to go so that the 3rd or 4th week of August, once school's back in session, we can get that moving, and there's plenty of time to do it before the ground freezes. Beacon Community they're very active and pursuing their permitting. They must feel very good about the potential funding. We have not heard anything about that. But they are looking to go to the zoning board, I think in January, to get some minor amendments to their permit, like some parking things and things like that that they have to change. So downtown planning, I wasn't at the last meeting, Ms. Kruger was, but there is an agenda and a process, and I think I brought a copy with me. I don't have the latest one.
Wednesday night.
It's Wednesday night. It's coming up, 2 nights.
Out there in viewer land.
So it's the second of following up on the one that was held in November. Was it November, October, whatever it was? Yeah. In consultation with the fire chief and finance directors, we are going to work on a follow-up to the fire staffing study, and we feel like this will be a really good concentrated working group with our staff from the fire department and finance to figure out some things, the steps we can take to start to implement some of the findings in that study. It's a important study. It recognizes the challenges that the fire department is facing, and we have enough information for us to inform some decisions during this budget year. Long term, there's a lot of other moving pieces to that, and we'll keep you updated on that. Speaking of budget, we have one more budget hearing tomorrow, and then we'll be through our budget hearing process. Then we'll be working internally about making some decisions on priorities and things based on the recommendations that you've identified and the Finance Committee has identified. And then that's all driving towards the budget presentation, which, whether we have scheduled it or not, we're shooting for January 11th. And I'm not sure if we put that on the calendar or not. That's a Thursday before Martin Luther King. Yeah, so maybe that's something on agenda setting we can discuss.
Choice there.
Well, the Tuesday is January 16th, and I just think that's the first day after the 3-day weekend, and I would prefer to get it. People are screaming, "Oh, it's too early," but I just think whatever the deadline is, when the deadline is, we'll get there.
The thing is that it's either the 14th or the 16th is in the charter.
16th.
Is it the 16th?
Yeah.
I think the 15th, but I don't know.
I know.
Anyway,
They
it's the
chose-
16th,
yeah.
anyway.
The 16th is in charge, so we could do it on the 16th, but again, just in case anything happened, I would rather have the 11th locked in, and so we'll.
It might snow.
I did not say a time, but I
kind
think
of our
that's
traditional.
usually what we do, yeah.
I'm just putting my calendar,
Yeah.
I can adjust it.
However it's your meeting to call, so. The big thing on the budget, and I'll give you a preview of the budget, I think it's scheduled for December 18th, is all about health insurance. Whether we have to take additional action this fiscal year, we have an insurance advisory committee meeting on Wednesday where we will be reviewing some of the options, none of them good, with our employee groups. The good news is our employee groups are highly educated about this. It's a trust, so it's their money as well as the town, so it's not like it's a zero-sum game. The town does bear the largest portion when there are changes to the trust because we pay 3/4 of the bills for health insurance costs. And the trust is not doing well right now, and we have to fix that. And last year when this came up, we said we would absorb it somehow in our budgets, which is what we're doing. We increased rates by 20%, which means the town had to put money in, the schools had to put money in, and the employees had to put additional money in. Now we're looking at, we went out to bid to get quotes. We're looking at going to a fully insured plan to stay with a trust with plan design changes, perhaps joining another trust. These are significant changes, but status quo is not an option for us. And that's the thing we've been saying over and over to our employee groups, is status quo is not an option. We can't just increase rates because we have one of the most robust health insurance plans at one of the lowest costs, and that's not sustainable. And what our bidding told us is that confirmed what we worried about, so that's not sustainable. So these are going to be uncomfortable and hard decisions to make. but it's things that we will, I really believe we have really good will with our employee groups, and that's the key to managing through this. What other things? Oh, an important thing, I sent you an email earlier, the boiler at the North Amherst Fire Station broke, and we have a replacement cost of about $46,000 to get it fixed. So right now, there is no heat in the North Amherst Fire Station except for the second floor, which is where the living quarters are. So we have had the building inspector and the fire department have been actively working with people from the school. The HVAC people from the schools have all come over and helped pitch in, having a company come in. And we're hopeful that we'll get that. We totally expect that it'll get fixed in the next few days. Fortunately, the weather is okay. It's still going to be cold, but this is an emergency, and we're going to figure out where the money comes from. This is we might even be looking for a reserve fund transfer, because this is exactly what a reserve fund is held for, and why we keep that money in that account. We had, just as a side note, the curator for the Jones Library was over here and has been looking at our space in this room, and they have a lot of material that they would like to be able to exhibit. And this seemed to be a logical place for us to exhibit that. So they're hoping to have this done probably around the first of the year, where they will come in, install some art. We'll have to sign, or I'll have to sign a agreement with them that it's still their art, even if it's on our walls. But they're really excited about having some space, because they have all this material that's in their collections, that's archived in the Jones, but no one ever gets to see it, and they have beautiful work. So they're really thrilled to have the opportunity. And we basically said, look at this entire room to see what works and what doesn't work. So they were going to go back, look at the spaces. They will take total responsibility for installing the pieces, and we will have our staff carefully take down the art that's on the wall and store it safely. Yes?
I'm assuming when the library does whatever they're displaying, there'll be a little descriptive, like when you go
Yes.
to the museum.
Yes. Yeah, they will, and they just said as long as it can stay up for a period of time. They don't want to come in every month, and our custodian was feeling the same way. It's like we have a monthly thing in the hallways, but what happens sometimes is people walk around looking for art. We don't, there are a lot of meetings in here. We can't have people walking in. This would be like a year or at a time before we change it. So that's what we have had the conversation about. Just to back up, we talked about finances. One of the questions for you is whether we need a BCG budget coordinating group meeting. You had suggested this, Mr. Chair, about having one before Christmas, and as we talked about it today, we, just be given where we are on the health insurance, so we can talk about whether we need to call one the week of the 11th or 18th, or if we should wait till after the first of the year. We can have something to talk about, because we're all building our budgets, but we still don't. We have this big sort of unknown out there, but we want to share that as much as possible with everybody, and we're sort of just plowing through all the different things. What can we do to mitigate this? So those are the things I wanted to highlight in my report. So there are other things.
Are there questions for the
I
man?
have several. So, page 1, Business Improvement District.
Yep.
Finalized renewal of the MOU. Will we get a copy of that soon?
Sure.
Excellent. And on the second page, also associated with the bid, perhaps because of the attention it received, the word bandstand doesn't actually appear in the bullet about memo has been sent to boards, commissions, committees, informing that the select board has permitted the bid to begin the process of meeting with the required permitting boards and the public.
One would think. That's
What?
a good one. Yeah, yeah.
And we haven't seen that
Yep.
memo, so if we could get a copy
Sure.
of that. That was the reference letter, I think, was one of
Yes.
the ways we were
Yep.
referring to it.
Mhm.
So we need that. And moving on to page 4, associated with the economic development. So obviously, you and Mr. Kravitz are working directly with Pioneer Valley
Yes.
Planning Commission associated with the Economic Development Plan. And then, given Mr. Kravitz's role on UTAC, I'd just like some assurance that UTAC's going to be talked to in there, not just Mr. Kravitz, who is, of course, amazing with Mr. Morales and Mr. Zomack and Ms. Buffon, but that UTAC, which is having a meeting this week, of
Yes.
course, it could be mentioned that at some point, maybe they'll have them meet with a couple of people from UTAC.
Yeah, so we did talk about, they have read the UTAC plan, so the consultants are aware of that, and they've, were complimentary of that, the work that had already been done. We've talked about how to engage the public in multiple different ways, and but UTAC is a good, important one to mention.
And it doesn't need to be part of it. They should not be shoved into, they should show up at the public thing.
Yep.
They should be, I mean, between Mr. Kravitz and Mr. Morales, they could identify people who've been working on issues who could then talk to them about it. That would be really helpful. And speaking of things that would be really helpful, people talking to people, is on page 6. I know, it's just going to surprise you, it's only like the 5th time I brought it up, is with the school study. I realize it's not our study, it's UMass and the Donahue Institute, but if you could please encourage the people at UMass who are doing the contracting to talk to people from the school committee, perhaps a longer-serving school committee member than the ones we currently have, in addition to the current 1 or 2 from the current school committee, and also to speak with select board member. It doesn't have to be me, but it needs to be somebody, because if that study's going to have any credibility coming out the other end, if they'd have an idea from a variety of people what the questions are that people want answered. I mean, I know they're very professional, but we don't want as many complaints. We want to avoid some of the complaints that we know we'll get, because we always get complaints about our studies. That's helpful. And thank you for bringing up the part, moved back in time to page 4, on the DOT road construction, which brings me to another issue that is perhaps a retreat type item, which is I think we should be doing our select board mail a different way. I don't think it is at all. I can tell you for a fact it is totally useless to me to get several PDF scanned items of completely random things and called select board mail of the day with a date on it. That doesn't help me find anything. That doesn't help me know what things I need to do. I really appreciate when Ms. Pupple tells us, like, the Comcast one went to here, this one went to there, this one went, that's really helpful. But I wonder if she has any ideas about another way to do it. I'm not trying to make more work for her, but like I blew right past that because when I look at it, you know, you get 3 letters on the PDF title. It's like, do I want to look at this now? Then I have to save it as something else, yada, yada, yada. I'm just not sure it's useful to say, here's the mail that came in on December 10th. and then just have to read all the things. But I appreciate that she scans them for us. That's great, because in the olden days, we used to just get copies in our packet, and depending on how long we had between meetings, so it's a huge improvement. I just wonder if there's a tweak that she might consider, just based on her professional experience, of another way to do it. Because I'd totally forgotten about that until we were looking for something else, and I ran across it, and I was like, oh, yeah. And so luckily, TAC was already on it, so. But they did direct it to the select board, and we never talked about it. Thanks.
Other things? Nope. Anything else? On the manager's report, yeah. Any questions or comments from the manager?
Comments from the manager was the report was very complete, which is why I don't have
Very
more
complete.
questions. That
There's
it's
a lot
good
going
thing.
on in this town, yeah.
There is.
So if not, then I think we can move on to select board member reports. Who would like to go first?
None to go offer this time.
Scooter, do you have?
Just, I'm looking at my calendar to try to remember what I did in the last 2 weeks. And we did have,
Turn your mic.
Steinberg and I and
Turn your mic.
Fetterman, we
Your
did
mic.
have a conversation about social services. We're sort of an ongoing work in progress on that. Mr. Bachman and I both attended the BID annual meeting and holiday party.
Weld, too.
And-
Mr. Wald.
Oh, Mr. Wald, oh, right,
Yes.
he came at the end, yes, Mr. Wald, who's not with us tonight. That is, I think because of the holidays, I mean, even though Thanksgiving was a week before, we didn't meet last week. It just seemed to be somewhat a quiet week. Some stuff happened. I don't have anything else. I don't really have anything to report. Oh, and I'm delighted that the Information Technology Department worked with me to replace my old, not working so good iPad with this new one. And if other members are having the same kind of problems I was having, they were very responsive. And you know, when you transfer things over and you get little things, some works and some doesn't, so they've worked with me a couple times to get it all squared up, and I brought it tonight, and I'm very happy. So, thank you to everyone who made that happen.
Ms. Brewer, do you have any?
I have a question and a couple quick comments associated with upcoming deadlines, which really aren't really close deadlines, but they're things for people to think about. I really appreciate that Ms. Burgess, given all the other things she was doing, including still following up on the bylaws associated with town meeting, to get out, as you mentioned in your report, the nomination papers, which you referred to as election papers, so that people, I'm like, dude, they're nomination papers. So one signature, everybody has their little ways of referring to these things. But so for town meeting members, as I just described to a town meeting member at Mary Maple on Friday, the deadline to submit nomination papers is Tuesday the 6th, which is the day after all the citizen petitions are due for town meeting.
6th of, say, the month.
February. So February
18th.
5th is when everything's due for town meeting that comes from citizens other than resolutions. And then Tuesday, February 6th is when one signature for town meeting is required and 50 for townwide office. And of course, always get a few extra because that's what you do. And you should be able to tell fairly easily from the town website, although we don't publish per se a list at this point of which offices are open. And then every town meeting precinct, some have seats in 1, 2, and 3 year increments. So for people to be aware that that's available now, has been available since Friday. Thank you to Ms. Burgess. And so people can get that turned in anytime up to and including the 6th of February. And the other thing I wanted to mention is now completely escaping me, so I guess it can't have been that important, right? So yeah, it'll come to me in a moment or it won't. That's okay. Oh, MMA. So I know we have on our working agenda list that we would take positions on the resolutions that we never seem to get a chance to actually look at before they're final, because that's just how it works. I'm sure you didn't hear that. And so, yeah, sometimes they're published in the Beacon, but, for those of us with wire that don't necessarily read the hard copy Beacon so slavishly because we expect everything to be online, which is not necessarily fair. So at any rate, so maybe there was something out there and we didn't see it, but at any rate, we haven't weighed in on the resolution. So if we're going to weigh in, it's usually, after it's a done deal, and little old Amherst is going to have a complaint about one section or another.
Why
but
don't we just do what we do historically, vote one up and one down?
one down and
Just
just
get it
be
done
done
before we
with it.
Right. We'll flip a coin as to which one.
But a couple of us at least are on panels, and I think we should just perhaps check in later at another meeting as to who's planning to go, when, and work out the logistics of various pieces of that, particularly those of us doing presentations. And then also I have the honor of working on, I guess I'm allowed to say it, right? That I'm working on, too late now, that I'm working on looking at the annual reports that were submitted for the contest. So it turns out there were a lot.
Since you're the only one who volunteered.
Yeah,
Potentially 351.
you guys figured out right away that was going to be a really,
There were
it was
three
three
mail
mail
bins.
bins full of stuff.
You volunteer?
I've seen what ours looks like. I can only imagine the other 350 that are potentially
Yes.
candidates for the report.
Yeah, so,
A little bit dry.
yeah. So that's all out there. But anyway, we should check in about MMA at some point, just in
Yes.
terms of
Resolutions, dates.
any things we do have.
other things.
Parties.
That's right. Yeah, I have to register, actually. So I don't think I have anything as far as, oh, I do, actually. So a subcommittee of the Affordable Housing Trust met regarding policy. We had a really nice discussion about potentially setting some goals to help frame the conversation and help drive sort of which policies and sort of think about timelines and, kind of coalescing some of the things that are sitting in a variety of different places. So I think when the trust will meet this Thursday evening, and one of the things that subcommittee is going to report back to the bigger board is sort of where we are on that, and potentially sort of offer some suggestions, get some feedback from the broader group about what their thoughts are on that sort of thing, about production goals, and potentially then, how do we achieve those, what, sort of mechanisms. The tendency with most of the things we've had, our housing production study and that sort of, they speak in very broad, non-declarative sort of ways, like the town should encourage blah, 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 whatever that is. And so it's not as prescriptive, and so therefore it creates a circumstance of inaction because it's not as, it's specific, but it's not in a way. And so I think that's where that policy group realizes we need to just sort of pick some stuff and see, not randomly, but I mean, think about what it means to pick some particular targets, and therefore what do you have to do to get those targets met. So I think that'll be some of the next work of that subcommittee for sure, and potentially the trust as a whole moving forward. I think the only other thing I wanted to mention was I was at the Mary Maple on Friday night. It was a very nice event, as it always is. We had pleasant weather. The new lights look very nice.
Right.
They're nice and bright. The other thing is, I believe the chamber sent us a little video clip from I'm assuming a drone, because I don't think I heard a helicopter, but it was an overhead shot of some of the activities, and it was really quite a neat little piece to look at. It was, and I think it may have been sent to all of us, but I'm not 100% certain, but that's a neat little piece to share.
Yeah, big,
And it was-
remember
it-
seeing
It was a private person who did it and sent it to the chamber, and they distributed it out.
Right.
Yeah.
But it captures the actual turning on of the lights of the tree, which is fascinating to
Band
see from above.
marching.
And the band, well, they sort of stroll. They don't
Yeah.
really march on that. They sort of
They
stroll
kinda
down the street.
dance.
Yeah, they kind of mosey on down the street, as it were. But that event was very nice, as it always is, and it was a delightful opportunity for the community to come together and sort of share the space of downtown a little bit. And I was reminded in walking around on the north part of the common that, boy, we really need to
Yeah.
get to that project, because it is really in
Yeah.
pretty rough
I'm
shape in a
really
lot of
hoping
ways.
for 2018.
Yeah, I think we all are in a lot of ways. But I think that's it for me as far as member report. And I believe, unless someone has anything else,
Nobody mentioned Four Towns.
that's true. Yes.
There's probably a
Conspicuous in
reason
its
for
absence.
that.
I'll just do the,
give a quick.
that this past Saturday, Amherst representatives from our school committee, select board, and finance committee, as well as representatives from those same committees in the other towns in our regional school district, Pelham, Tewksbury, Leverett, all met at the middle school to talk about where we were at with choosing a regional assessment method, which we haven't finalized yet. It was a conversation. It's something we do every year. We each town listens to the other towns, where they're at with budget and approach, and it's a very important part. It's one of the big pieces of the puzzle as we develop our budget, to know where we are with our regional school assessment. So we had that meeting, and we're proceeding on, and we don't have a conclusion yet.
Anyone want to add anything else? Because all of us that are here, were there.
True,
I think
you
that
don't
cap-
need to know.
I
But-
think that, from my mind, that captures it.
Yep.
And so barring any other member reports, I think we are through our agenda for the evening.
Except for whether or not we're meeting next week, which
Oh,
was never made clear to
Oh.
us.
Oh,
The extra meeting.
well.
It was a theory when we brought it up.
Yes. So I guess we should share that with you.
That's right, it says.
That might be useful, if you would
So-
like a quorum.
So the
Select board
intention is.
question mark in my calendar.
Yeah, so the, I think, in consultation with the manager and sort of his staffing as we come into the holiday season and thinking about what we have on our docket coming up, the thought is that we would meet on the 11th with the intention of a brief meeting on the 18th. is the idea. So try to do more business on the 11th, capture our liquor license from this evening as far as the actual motion and some other items. And so next Monday night's meeting will be a sort of usual size and shape. And the 18th the intention is to have it be much, much more brief and potentially earlier on the 18th. So we will be quizzing folks about time. Did you have a suggested time for the 18th?
I don't, I just like to, I think it'd be fun to go out to dinner afterwards, so.
Okay.
So,
So,
however early you
2
want it.
PM.
We're going to try and trim down
With
what's.
the early road
There are a couple
specials.
things we have to do on the 18th, like the budget update and things like that. But we think an hour, 60 to 90-minute meeting should suffice.
So could we do a 4 o'clock? Is that too early?
Well, it's even too early to, if we did do it in an hour, it'd be too early to go out. I mean, I was thinking 4:30 or 5.
Okay,
I'd like to put some time in, even if we adjust it, so I just
right.
planning other things around.
I'm good with that. What works better
5?
for you, Mr. Slaughter? You probably have
Any of those are fine.
the most
especially
constrained
with
schedule of the
business.
people present, so. Do we want to, if we did 4:30, we'd be done by 6 at the latest, so. Should we say 4:30, and if we change it later to be
Okay.
later?
Right.
Okay.
Always
I'm putting-
easier to change
that's
it to
fine.
be later.
I'm putting in 4:30. I just
Select
changed
Board,
it.
December 18th is at 4:30.
We should still carve out a long time in the evening.
Yeah.
Right.
We don't get to go do something else
It
afterwards.
just starts earlier.
Don't go to your other holiday parties. Let this be your holiday
But-
party.
But next week will be usual time, usual
6:30.
place. I was going to
18th
say
will-
usual length, but there-
You never know.
you never
Do
know.
people think that,
Yes.
do people think that the 11th makes sense? I mean, is there any reason why we wouldn't be doing that in January for the budget? I mean, aside from the fact that it is a little early, I think it's probably the earliest it's ever been. It's usually like around the 12th to 14th, but, because it's a Thursday.
January 11th.
Oh,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh,
So-
sorry,
no, no, no.
January 11th. I'm sorry.
Different
I'm
11th. So you're
being
talking
all
about the
blurry.
11th for the presentation of
yes.
the
What's
kite?
your
Fine.
question?
It's only a month from next week.
Right.
When it comes right down to it. No pressure or anything. So my question is, are we going to meet at 4 o'clock that day?
4:10.
Because I'd like to be able to put it in my calendar
Right.
if we're pretty certain that's when it's going to be.
Put it in, it can always be made later, as you just said.
Well, we'd like to invite the other boards.
Right.
So we invite
did
the
the-
finance,
No,
because the
but-
finance committee, I mean, that's kind
but
of
she
the
wants to
time
put it
that
in.
we normally do it. I
We
mean,
typically
it's
do it at
not
4
set
o'clock.
in stone, but we do normally do
My-
that.
My only question is for people who work, who are then coming from the, on the other boards, or even our board, is 4:30 more convenient? Someone has to, like, leave work and come over where 4 cuts into the workday for volunteer committee members. Just asking.
So I think we could ask that. I mean, I think it might be polite to go ahead and put the invite out, like tomorrow, and say, because it's us in the finance committee. That's who it's for.
Right.
And if they all say, 4:30 would really work so much better for me, then of course we should flex to 4:30. But if they all say we want it at 4 because we're planning to have a finance committee at 6:30, then that's
Right.
what
Right. And
frequently
I'm fine.
happens.
I put it in
And
at
for the
4 'cause-
public, it's not something we do any public comment at anyway, so.
Oh, and it's viewable.
But it's good for us, we have to get Amherst Media here and things like that.
Yeah, but they usually do 4.
Okay.
Although January is always harder for them because that's when people are away.
Did you put it in, Larry?
So we're going to say January 11th at 4 PM unless we get some feedback
Yes.
from the finance committee
Yes,
saying
and
we
if you
prefer
could check with
4:30.
people and make
Then on-
sure it sounds pretty
On
good.
December 18th, it's at 4:30. December 11th, 6:30 for
Correct.
select board.
Right.
Okay.
That's correct.
Calendaring is such a nightmare, but doable. Yes, we can do that. Okay, sounds
So I
good.
think,
That's great.
so I think that all falls sort of nicely together. Certainly for me, generally, more lead time is better. And so knowing these things now makes it easier to
Right.
schedule.
Right,
When I
knowing
do
you have to
interest,
do it,
they're
yeah.
mostly mine.
Exactly. So, barring any other
I just put it in our shared.
questions or comments, anything else? If not, I would take a motion to adjourn.
Move to adjourn.
Second.
All those in favor, please say aye.
Could you do it a little
Aye.
quicker?
Is 9:43.
Working on it.